بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. Uh, Thank you, brothers and sisters, for this participating in the second session from the new Maqasid methodology. And we could start with Dr. Jasir directly.
الله يكرمك. الحمد لله رب العالمين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أسعد خلقه وخاتم الرسل محمد صلى الله عليه وآله ورضي الله عن المهاجرين والأنصار ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. ثم أما بعد. It's جزاكم الله خير. I hope that the week gave you an opportunity to read the two chapters that we will be talking about, which are chapter 2 and 3. The course, I don't consider it to be a course. It's rather a seminar or a discussion. So it's not really a teaching experience for me. It's not like when I teach graduate students or when I have particular sections and slides and so on, so that they can absorb the information. I don't assume that they have read the books that I'm talking about. But in your case, I assume that you had a reading with the humble book that I sent. And I don't think it will be useful or at the depth that we wish if you do not have that reading and some questions and some interrogations. But what I will do anyway, inshallah, is to start with a survey, as I did last time, of the ideas of the two chapters that we are covering. We're covering chapter 2 and 3 in the book that you have. I will survey in order to remind you of the themes and the main ideas and perhaps give some higher perspective on the ideas in terms of the project that we are all in the context of, which is the Maqasid Institute project. And then I will open the floor for you to interrogate and question and comment and add and so forth. We're covering 2 and 3, and they are two different topics. One of them has to do with the limitations of current Islamic scholarship. That is why in our institute, we are trying to re-envision and reconstruct and reintroduce Islamic scholarship in a particular way. So the first chapter is on that topic. The second chapter is a reorientation of the Islamic worldview based on the Maqasid methodology. And therefore, I will divide our session into two sections. I will give an introduction to chapter 2 first, and then get into a discussion with that. And then I will go to chapter 3, give an introduction, and then ask you to contribute. I would prefer, if you don't mind, to see you, to be able to interact. To look at a screen with no faces on it is tough on me. And your interaction, unless you have something to do, of course. I mean, it's not. But I would prefer if you can turn on your cameras so I can, inshallah, interact and see you. Inshallah, Allah bless you. Chapter 2 is about kind of the alternative ideas or the literature that we have, if you're thinking in a thesis style. But because this is not a thesis and does not mean to cover all the personalities and papers and references and so on, and this is not the objective of the chapter. The objective of the chapter was redefined, like from previous versions of it, to become covering the problems that we have in the Islamic scholarship, not the streams or the personalities or the references, because this is a different project and a different topic. The problem is our topic, which is what are the issues that made us suggest that big proposition of reconstructing or reimagining or reorienting the Islamic scholarship. And the themes that ended up in the chapter that I find most representative of the kinds of problems that we have are those 5 themes that you have. Perhaps I can share the screen. If you allow me, please, to share the screen. If I can share with you those writings. Whoever is in charge, please just allow me. Jazakallah khair. So what I will do, I will just, as I said, skim over the highlights of the chapter rather than give instruction. So if we look at chapter 2, we are really talking about التقليد والتجزيء والتبرير والتناقض والتفكيك. And it started with the identification of limitations versus schools and trends. So we are not really talking about schools and trends. Why? Because I do believe that within the Wasatiyya school, there is taqlid, and there is tajzi, and there is tabrir, and there is tanaqud, and there is tafkik, and there is the lack thereof. There are people who are not muqallidun, and there are people who are not mujazzi'un, and there are people who are not. So I cannot really, with fairness and without getting too much heat, say that the Wasatiyya school is this, or the Islamization of knowledge school, because within the Islamization of knowledge school, there is tajzi', but there are trends that are integrative and so forth. Within the quote-unquote Salafiyya school, there are people who are different in terms of the way they do taqlid. They are not really like the taqlid, even though they claim to be a Salafiyya school, are not exactly muqallidun in the negative sense of taqlid. And within, I mentioned the deconstructionism here, but if I can say Western academia or Islamic studies in secular universities or any of that, within that, there are people who are deconstructionists, and there are people who happen to be there and they are not. They are more on the apologetic side, or some of them are genuine for now, or some of them have 2 personalities. One is for the Islamic scholarship, where they are genuine, and one for the industry that they work for, where they are not, and so forth. So that's why the identification of limitations versus schools here is in the approach. And of course, we would not go by the old approach of Sunnah and Shia and Ash'arite and Mu'tazilite and Maturidis and Ibadis, and who is Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, and the Shafi'iyya and the Malikiyya and the Ahnaf and so forth. And I think this is all good to learn and important to learn, but this is all history. This is really not how Islamic scholarship should proceed. I don't think that Islam came for us to be Sunnah and Shia and whatever, and whoever has power, to call themselves al-Jama'ah, or the truthful group. Al-Mu'tazila called themselves Jama'ah at some point, or Ahl Sunnah, and then eventually the Ash'ara called themselves Ahl Sunnah, and then eventually, and so forth. And of course, the bigger divisions that we had in our history, especially between those who supported Imam Ali radiallahu anhu and those who supported the other rivals and so forth. And so there is a long history behind that. And I don't think that Islamic scholarship should be divided this way. I think that within the classification of the classic groups, there is a lot of politics that the Maqasid methodology should go against. For example, look at what the Americans did in Iraq. They suddenly Iraq became Sunnah and Shia and Kurds. And of course, there was a division before that from the time of the previous tyranny. But basically, that division in the society that did not know that division and was seamlessly living. Yes, of course, people have these identities from the history, but they did not have areas or governments that deal with that. In Arabia, similarly, Sunnah and Shia, they lived, and Zaydis and so on in the south, and people lived, but they became different identities and minorities and majorities and so forth because of an agenda. The identification of some states to be Shafi'i and to be Maliki and to have this as an ideology of the state is something that states benefit from, or politicians really rather benefit from, but they are not really at the core of what Islamic scholarship should be about in the past or now. In the past, when Muslims were at the height of their civilization, these schools and these imams lived seamlessly in the society. They prayed behind each other and they married each other and so forth. And then at the time of the declination of the Islamic civilization, we started to have 4 mihrabs because people do not pray behind each other. We started to have prohibition of not just praying behind a Shafi'i. If I'm a Hanafi, you cannot marry that person because their marriage fiqh is different. And then we started to have wars in Baghdad and Bukhara and Quds and so forth that you read about in Tabari or others when they talk about not the Sunnah and Shia, we talk about the Shafi'i and the Ahnaf. And we really don't want to bring that history back to divide the Ummah into Shafi'i and Ahnaf. Another division, which is the typical division in Western academic circles, that has to do with moderates versus extremists and fundamentalists and progressives and who is who and where is what. And of course, you're aware of the RAND classification of Islamic trends, a very well researched but very biased approach that comes from a perspective of a government on its foreign policy, rather than the perspective of Islamic scholarship. And therefore, we will not really fall into dividing Muslims into fundamentalists and Islamists and modernists and postmodern. Postmodernist is not really something I found in any classification, but we are not going to get into that, even though some Muslim thinkers in the current time label themselves as postmodernists. Hadathiyin in Arabic, but it's really ma ba'da Hadathiyin. So all of these divisions are not our concern, and you can refer to that old book if you're interested, the Systems Approach book. I talked about that. But what we decided to do in order to get into the maqasid methodology is to divide the trends into the limits of the trends. And I tried really to define the trends in terms of the positive rather than the negative. I wanted to, instead of imitation, taqleed would be like genuinity. And instead of deconstruction, I would say reconstruction and so on. But then I realized that, no, we have to focus on the issues that we're trying to solve. We will agree next time that we should define a purpose first, not the problem, yes, but given a purpose of living Islam in today's life, giving a purpose of reviving Islam and so forth, giving a purpose of the achievement of the purposes of Islam, we have to look at the obstacles. And of course, within dealing with the obstacles, we are going to look at the positive sides as well, people who do not fall in these drawbacks or these mistakes, which I called here limitations, really. So when we talk about taqleed, we are really talking about taking the knowledge of the past as authority. In any school of Islamic scholarship, we're not really talking about the taqleed ala the al-muqallid wal-muqallad in the Shia sense, or taqleed in terms of what Ibn al-Qayyim wrote about, not in the fiqhi sense anyway. It's a much wider concept of taqleed. There is taqleed in lugha, in linguistics, and there is a whole division between the Arabists or the Arabic linguistics or the Arab linguistics of the renewal in the theories and so on, and people who are muqallidun, who do not want to renew. And of course, there is somewhere in between, and there is a spectrum. There is taqlid in hadith between people who would like to renew the sciences of hadith and look at the criteria of evaluating narrators and so on, and others who would like to just copy from the latest that we had in the past, which would be like Ibn Salah or something, or like just the latest of centuries ago. And they wouldn't even allow Al-Arnaut or Al-Albani to renew some of the criteria, whether you agree with them or not, or Ahmad Shakir, of course. There is taqlid in philosophy where people would like to stick to the Kalami divisions and the Kalami issues, and the Ash'ari and the Mu'tazila and the Maturidiyya, والتعطيل والتشبيه والتجسيم والتأويل and so forth, versus people who would like to renew the Islamic philosophy and try to look. But how they renew is also going to be part of what we deal with. But here we're talking about the limitation of taqlid. There is taqlid in Sufism, where people have a certain tradition, and there are ideas in some tariqas today that are new ideas, generally rejected by even the students of some of these sheikhs, without getting into examples. But basically, yeah, there is taqlid and there is tajdeed, let alone jurisprudence, of course. So basically, we're talking about the taqlid as in taking the streams from the past as authority. That's something that I'm going to bring as a dalil. Being a member of a number of fiqhi deliberation, communities and so forth, when I attend, I could see, to start with, a division between the taqlid and the tajdeed in, you name it, the European Council of Fatwa, the North American Council, the Indian Council, the councils that I happen to attend, where some people do taqlid, some people do taqlid, not just for the imams of the past, but also where they come from in terms of the imams that they follow. And some people have a free mind. Some people, when you argue about a fatwa or a hukum, they say, well, Imam Ibn Taymiyyah mentioned this, or Imam Shafi'i has said that. And then we spend half an hour arguing whether an imam has mentioned this or not. Whether really Al-Ghazali or Tufi or Al-Aini or mentioned that or not. And then we get into the history of the manuscript, and as if I decide really that this was an opinion by Ibn al-Qayyim for the Hanabila or Ibn al-Arabi for the Malikiyya, then khalas, it's an authority. It's done. It's how we are going to do fatwa today in a council that looks at a question coming from an American city or a European city. And that is wrong, methodologically speaking, because that taqlid, these imams themselves said that. And it is well famous in the heritage, الجمود على المنقول في الكتب ضلال في الدين. If you are stagnant about what you read or what you copy from the books, then this is going astray in the religion and so on. But anyway, so I'm not going to use them as a dalil for their mistake. What we should use is the Quran and Sunnah. And this is our methodology. So if we go back to the Quran and Sunnah, we'll find that the imitation or taqlid is madmoom, is detested. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in a number of places in the Quran, has asked people not to follow their forefathers or follow without an evidence, a dalil or a proof or a hujjah or an ayah. And the Prophet ﷺ, he said, لا يكن أحدكم إمعة. None of you should be like the person with no character. If people do good, then they could do good. If they do bad,
but وطنوا أنفسكم من أحسن الناس وأن تحسنوا وإن أساءوا أن تجتنبوا إساءتهم وإن أساءوا أن تتجنبوا ذلك. Different narrations. Basically, if people do good, then do good. If people do evil, then do not do evil and do good. How are you going to do that? By not being muqallid. Because if you are an imma'a or a character, somebody, imma'a is like a zombie in English, really. You just follow, and you're not, you have a particular, you're empty. A general absence of the ethics of this agreement is one of the major problems of taqleed. We have divisions in our communities. We have divisions between places in the Muslim Ummah because of the politics and the economics and the culture of it, yes. But taqleed is a big part of it. Taqleed, people identify by this and that, especially in pluralistic societies like we have in the West. People identify as, Hanafi because they come from India, or Maliki because they come from North Africa, and they fight over the tiniest things, like raising your finger in the prayers and so on, and the adhan and so on. But then the masjid is divided, and there will be no tolerance and no cooperation towards higher purposes. Diminishing or neglecting the direct studies of the revelation is a major problem here. And I see it, frankly, even in scholarly circles, where people are supposed to do jurisprudence in the legal sense, but they are supposed to go back to the Quran and Sunnah. You hear a whole khutbah with no Quran and Sunnah, with just, except for Allah ya'muru bil 'adli wal ihsan and so on. You see a whole 30, 40-page research that deals with an issue in the family law without an original reference to the Quran and Sunnah. قال الإمام الشافعي this and that, and then because of the Shafi'iyya or al-Juwayni, and then Imam al-Juwayni would cite the Quran and Sunnah. But we need to go back to citing the Quran and Sunnah for ourselves. The third, which is an issue as well, the lack of critical awareness of Islamic history, because with taqleed comes a culture of the glorification and the sanctification of imams of the past. And if you say that you differ with one of the imams on something, or yes, this hadith is in Bukhari, but some people objected to it, some scholars, past and present, object. They say, then we get into the silliness of who are you to object to these people, and these people were the imams that will never repeat themselves, and all of that. And that is a critical lack of awareness of our history and how history developed, and who are these imams. And from the time of the Sahaba, who are the Sahaba, and who was knowledgeable and who was not, and who was closer to the Prophet from who else, and so forth. And the lack of awareness of the history and the dynamics of the history. And as we live today, and as we see the dynamics of scholars, if we are going to imitate the scholars, I can tell you that I can identify the Imam al-Zuhris of today, and Imam al-Subkis of today, and Al-Hasan al-Basris of today, and Al-Hussein ibn Ali of today. And I can identify these of today, because this is a pattern of scholars dividing into the scholars of the Sultan, and the scholars of the Ummah, and the scholars of the revolution, if you wish. The scholars of the revolution, like the rare examples that we had, were usually unsuccessful revolutions because they didn't have enough backup from the masses, from the grandson of the Prophet ﷺ on. And therefore, the majority of the scholars of the Ummah decided to serve the Ummah, and decided to isolate from what they call the Sultan or the authorities, and deal with them only in advice. And some of those decide to work for the Sultan for some maslahah or some benefit, personal or public, that they see. And therefore, Imam al-Zuhri of the time, and how he worked with Hisham ibn Abd al-Malik, standing at his door and wearing the soldier's clothes. Yet Imam al-Zuhri, eventually during the time of Umar ibn Abd al-Aziz, had the luck of a better hakim, a better governor, and that's why he was able to contribute in a better way than the time when he stood at the door of Hisham ibn Abd al-Malik. And we see Al-Hasan al-Basri, who was avoiding to give the chain of narrators sometimes because he didn't want to get into trouble with al-Hajjaj of the time. And eventually al-Hasan al-Basri had to hide for 7 years from al-Hajjaj until al-Hajjaj died. That is an example of the alim of the ummah. And in between Imam al-Shafi'i, and they put him in prison, and then he made a deal with Harun al-Rashid that I'm not going to be part of your government, I'm not going to be a judge, but let me go and teach people in the different regions. And Imam Abu Hanifa did not make this deal, and that's why he was poisoned in prison, and so forth. So the lack of awareness of the Islamic history is very important. The times of rise and the times of fall in our civilization. When we copy, at least we should copy from the times of the rise and the times of knowledge and the times of Bayt al-Hikmah and so forth, and when the scholars were open to ideas and so forth, versus the time of the declination, when the scholars were very limited and they were just trying to protect the deen in their perspective by protecting the basic items of scholarship, of worship, and so forth. So 3 consequences of imitation that you read about here in that, and therefore it is not possible to pose our political questions today to al-Mawardi. He lived in a very different planet, or to Ibn Taymiyyah, who lived, as you see, almost 3 centuries after. Al-Mawardi lived in a world, Ibn Taymiyyah lived in a very different world, where the Tatarians were ruling the countries and Yasiq and all of it's a very different story versus the nation states of today. If we have a political question in Egypt or Arabia or Jordan, or versus in Canada or America or Germany, these are very different contexts, and therefore we need political theories and foundations for research in political science from the Islamic perspective that deals with the reality, not to copy from al-Mawardi or Juwayni, a theory that no longer exists, Ahl al-Hall wal-Aqd, or I don't know, al-A'imma min Quraysh, or any of that. We cannot continue to pose the economic questions to Abi Yusuf or to Ibn Khaldun, despite the fact that they were great scholars, and everybody who deals with Islamic economics has to read al-Kharaj and has to read al-Muqaddimah and has to, this is ABC Islamic economics. But we cannot really open al-Kharaj and look for economic policy. For today, this is not going to work. We cannot continue to pose the medical questions to Razi or Ibn Rushd or At-Tibb al-Nabawi ala sahibi salatu wassalam. That was partly wahi, and that is Islam, al-Ruqya and al-Asala, but partly was just the Tibb of Arabia. So when people open hospitals, Islamic hospitals, that deal with only the kay or the burning of wounds and al-Habba al-Sawda, and this is not an approach, because they don't understand. Or astronomical question for that matter. Recently, in one of those councils I'm on, we were debating something about the times of Ramadan and the Hilal and all of this endless debate. And some people were quoting al-Bayruni and so forth, al-Biruni or al-Farabi, and they said, no, he calculated the angle differently. And I said, well, no, I mean, when it comes to angles, we could trust NASA more than al-Farabi. Yani, come on. Yani, al-Farabi, yes, he built a foundation of the sciences that NASA eventually calculates the moon and the sun based on. But certainly the calculations of NASA for the moon would be more accurate than the calculations of al-Biruni. And we really, because we are a fiqh council, we want to rely on the angle calculated by al-Biruni, and then when we went into more details, formed a committee, and some specialists came in. I will talk about that, of course, within our methodology. They were able to confirm that actually, yes, that the calculations of NASA are more accurate. And if we're going to apply the criteria for the Hilal or for the time of Fajr and so forth, and so forth. Imitation is a major problem in Maqasid studies as well, because I had personally debates with a number of scholars who have a major problem with adding any maqasid to the 5 maqasid of Hifz al-Din wa Nafs wal-Aql. One of them, because he says it publicly, I would mention his name. For example, Sheikh Ali Jum'a, I remember meeting him in Cairo in one of the seminars. And he told me, لا 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 ما عدل إيه وحرية إيه. What is this justice and freedom? And no, no, no. مقاصد are حفظ الدين والنفس والعقل والمال. He said this in the seminar. And he insisted that we are not supposed to look at any other maqasid. And my answer was, well, these maqasid, if they come from a modernist kind of approach, then it is apologetic. I agree. But if it comes from the Quran, when he said, subhanahu wa ta'ala, لِيَقُومَ النَّاسُ بِالْقِسْطِ, therefore qist is a maqsid. Taqwa is a maqsid. Tawheed is a maqsid. Tawheed is not part of the 5. He said, no, but this will be then within the 5. But we have to stick to the 5. وهم يجرون في المقاصد جري الماء في الورد. He said that water, it's like water that flows in the flower, but we have to keep the flower. We cannot take the water and destroy the flower. This kind of thing. And that imitation has limitations. When we stick and stagnate at the maqasid of the 5 or the 6, and we insist that everything has to go under that, we end up methodologically with outcomes that are against the Islamic worldview, the Quranic pattern, tasawwur, which we're going to discuss in the second half of this session. We end up with methodological errors that make us fall into non-Islamic ideas and non-Islamic systems and so forth. And of maqasid studies as well, thousands of studies of Al-Ghazali, wal-Qarafi, wal-Tufi, Ibn al-Qayyim, wal-Shatibi especially, and so forth. And if you read Shatibi well, you will know that Shatibi was about tajdeed. Shatibi, he took the maqasid and he restructured the usul. Al-Muwafaqat fi usul al-Sharia. Shatibi's project was a big renewal project. It was not a project of imitation. So we cannot stop today and say we're going to imitate the Shatibi and nothing should come after Shatibi, as I heard from another scholar, that nobody should come after Shatibi, and everybody who came after Shatibi is really copying from Shatibi. And if I mention, for example, Shah Waliullah Dahlawi, who is mentioned here, and you read his Hujjatullah al-Baligha, this is different. This is not a Shatibi. Yes, he was impacted, obviously, but he added things that were commensurate with the 12th century Hijri or the 18th century Common Era, that Imam Shah Waliullah Dahlawi had added that. And I think he was an important step in the development of al-Maqasid until we have the Maqasid methodology today. Now, to pass quickly, because I really want to open as much time as I can for the questions and answers, I want to get into the other issue of the contradiction or at-tanaqud. The tanaqud is when you have two references. What I wrote here, and I hope it doesn't upset some people, like the epistemological schizophrenia, that you have, you are referring to the Quran and Sunnah or referring to taqleed sometimes, and you are also referring to Nietzsche and Derrida and so forth, or you are referring to Kant and so forth, or you're discussing social justice and therefore you are referring to roles. And I have seen a number of theses, since I'm in the academic field and thesis, I see theses all the time. I have seen at least 5 or 6 theses, long theses, where the students are dealing with the questions of justice, and especially social justice. So they say, oh, the Quran is saying Allah enjoined justice, and the Prophet ﷺ said justice is there, al-adl wal-adala wal-qist. And then when they get to the policy that they are discussing, or the law in the legal sense, or when they talk about justice in the social sense of different races or different societies and so on, all of a sudden they switch to roles. And all of a sudden, roles theory is the theory of justice. But you know, roles doesn't match, doesn't fit. Is everything that roles say is wrong? Of course not. I mean, he has a lot of good ideas there, but from the premise of the barriers and the blindness and all of that Rawls talked about, from the premises of his philosophy, and from rationality that he comes from, and so on, all the way to the policies of government that people who embrace roles are embracing, there is a methodological problem here, because you are mixing things, and you end up really being Rawlsian or Kantian or Nietzschean, for that matter, when you deal with ethics, for example. Just because he said a few things that could make sense from an Islamic point of view, then we talk about ethics in terms of Razi in his book, or Ghazali, and then all of a sudden we jump to Nietzsche, or these people who actually destroyed ethics, deconstructed ethics. And we're going to talk about deconstruction as well. And the Prophet ﷺ said in the riwayah of Aisha radiallahu anha, that two ways of life, dinan, لا يجتمع دينان. Not just في جزيرة العرب, but or in Arabia, Aisha has a narration where you really cannot have two deens in your heart, Aisha is saying in her narration. And with all due respect, this has to do with some of the people who do عقلي ونقلي, شرعي وعصري, إسلامي وحياتي, ديني ودنيوي, نصوصي وواقعي. Some people do this in an integrative way, and they go to the original sources. I'm not saying that everybody has a problem here, but some of the aqli and naqli have this schizophrenia that I'm talking about. When they do naqli, they go back to the books of fiqh only of the past, fiqh as in jurisprudence only, the legal studies. And when they do aqli, they take the latest American textbook in management, or Oxford textbook in psychology or something, and that becomes the aqli that we are talking about. And therefore, they define psychology as it is defined in secular academia today, and they define the Islamic take on psychology as it was defined, by al-Balkhi or others. And then where is the Quran and Sunnah, and how can we renew that? And by the way, when I mention secular, I do not mean secular in the sense of separating a state from the religious institutions. If you take this definition of secular, and Rahimallah al-Masiri, Rahimahullah, in his partial, what al-Masiri called the partial secularism versus the total secularism, in his analysis, which I'm part of my obvious impacts from the scholars of our previous generation, that partial secularism in that sense, if you want to separate the state from religious institutions, as in a church or as in an Islamic university, or that is good, because you really don't want the state to run the church or the mosque as an institution, and you don't want the mosque to run the state. But if you're talking about separating religion or faith or deen in the Islamic sense, separating deen from life, then secularism is negative, and that is how we attack it here, and we consider it to be a non-Islamic philosophy in that sense, because it becomes a materialist philosophy. It becomes an ideology of kicking out faith from life, public spaces, government, and so on. But faith has everything to do with government, and governance has everything to do with sports and arts, has everything to do with public expressions of morality and living privately, and family and society and neighborhood and so forth. Some people, in the name of secularism and in the name of separating the church from state, they want to kick out Islam or religion, for that matter, from everything in life. Maqasid studies has its share of contradiction when people mix references, as I'm saying. We're talking here, let me skip quickly to the deconstruction or the tafkik. Added a sentence that you don't have in your copy here, which I find a good sentence to really describe deconstruction: decreation, disintegration, deconstruction, decenterment, displacement, difference, discontinuity, disjunction, disappearance, decomposition, de-definition, demystification, detotalization, and delegitimization. And that could be delegitimization or demystification or de-definition, could be Islamic, but we will really have to know what we are talking about here. Are we talking about the authority of the revelation al-wahi, No, there is no demystification, or there is no delegitimization, because our legitimacy is based on how much we are faithful to that source of knowledge. But if we are talking about the hegemony of a certain race or a certain strata in a society or a certain power, then power is not all evil or negative in Islam, but the part of power that is not going to accept truth and justice and mercy and the other Islamic value, and is going to do the marginalization that we talk about and the hegemony in the negative sense that we are talking about, therefore we are going to delegitimize and decompose and dedefine and so forth in order to redefine. And this project I consider to be a redefinition. Even in the title that I have so far is a re-envisioning or a redefinition or a reconstruction. It is not a deconstructionist project in the sense of postmodernist deconstruction here, but it is a reconstruction project in the sense of demystifying and delegitimizing the wrong, given the Quranic authority and the haymana, the hegemony. وَنَزَّلْنَا إِلَيْكَ الْكِتَابَ, I added this verse as well in this version of the book. And we have revealed to you the book of truth to confirm that is preceded of the scripture and to be hegemonic. وَمُهَيْمِنًا عَلَيْهِ. The hegemony or the haymana is a Quranic concept. But how to be hegemonic and what truth are you serving and how much you are faithful to justice. This is what hegemonic means. If hegemony is going to be against justice or is going to be a racist movement for the sake of a particular race or particular strata, then it is unaccepted, it has to be deconstructed. But if hegemony is the hegemony of the book or the word of Allah over what else, then this is the hegemony that the Quran talked about. وَمُهَيْمِنًا عَلَيْهِ. مُهَيْمِنًا, hegemonic. And we did certainly send Musa with the Quran, وَسُلْطَانٍ مُبِينٍ, with the book, al-ayat, and the sultan. So the ayat have a sultan, and we are going to talk next time about the sultan, or the authority of the asma, of the concepts, of the ayat, of the signs, and how this sultan is supposed to reshape our understanding of today's institutions and today's scholarship at the basis of that institution. So I hope I didn't take too much time, but this is just my survey of chapter 2. And I would like to take perhaps an hour or less to get to your questions. Please shoot. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. The microphone is open for anyone who want to share his thoughts or ask or put his recommendations, etc.
السلام عليكم.
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله. أهلا دكتور تامر.
ازيك يا دكتور؟ اخبار حضرتك ايه؟
الله يحفظك يا دكتور.
الله يبارك فيك. معذرة انا قافل الكاميرا مش عشان حاجة، بس انا لسه طالع من كورونا فبتكلم من السرير ولسه مشعوذ و نظري يقول شايف يعني.
الله يكرمك. But we are not going to be infected through the camera. Allah bless you.
الله يرضى.
لا ألف سلامة ألف سلامة. تفضل. تفضل ألف سلامة. In English إن شاء الله for everybody.
So I have a couple of questions. When sorry.
تفضل مولانا. Don't worry about the camera. Allah Akbar. I'm just joking with you أخي.
لا انا صوت الاذان اذن فخليته بس يعني يخلص
الله يا ما شاء الله الاذان.
بارك الله.
I missed the very loud اذان of Cairo يعني you know.
انا في انجلترا، بس هو الاذان بتاع مصر يعني.
بتاع مصر ما شاء الله. طيب ماشي ما شاء الله. You are in England. الله أكبر. Please go ahead دكتور please.
So my first question was regarding the comment that you've made about if we are going about the taqlid, and you suggested that if we should be copying, we should be copying from the periods where we were in good conditions, in a civilized era. Everything is we are in a high standards, basically scholarly standards. But I mean, don't you think that this contradicts with the very idea of taqleed? Because regardless of which era that we are, or period that we are referring to, we shouldn't be copying. That's it. We shouldn't be driven by the scholars, but rather we should be following their procedure. Yeah, and for instance, as far as I understand, Imam Shafi'i used to give a certain fatwa in Egypt, which may be different in Iraq or elsewhere. So the Imam himself have changed, have not followed the taqleed blindly, but actually he set he sets a certain process or a methodology that is adaptable, that should consider the context, and accordingly the fatwa comes next. So if we want really to follow or to make taqleed, we should be following not the opinions of the scholars in a particular period, whether regardless if it's a good period or a bad period, but rather we would be following this methodology, this the process that he followed or they followed by considering the context and the unique conditions of the community that they were living in. This was my first question. The second question was, one second. I took some notes here. 1 second, sorry. The second point is related to the example that you mentioned, or your discussion with Sheikh Ali Jum'a regarding al-maqasid and the inclusion of al-qist or al-adl as a maqsad, and his comment. But don't you think that the maqsad al-adl or al-qist could be classified as one of the maqasid al-aliyah, which basically which the way I see it is that it's two faces of the same coin. The fulfillment of the maqasid of حفظ النفس, الدين, المال إلى آخره, they all stem from عدل. And Sheikh Jamal al-Din Atiyah, in his classification of maqasid al-aliyah and maqasid al-khalq, he saw that he offered additional layers of maqasid on top of the maqasid al-amma or the general maqasid and the partial maqasid.
Jamil.
But why don't we consider al-adl as one of the maqasid al-aliyah that basically cut across or is considered as an underlying maqsad for all the 5 maqasid?
No. جميل. بارك الله فيك أخي. يعني first, I think that we need to work in parallel lines, given the reality of Muslims and given the reality of the way we approach things. Yes, we do believe that we have to go to the Quran and Sunnah fundamentally, and we have to build everything on the Quran and Sunnah fundamentally, but we deal with different minds and different institutions and different personalities. And therefore, sometimes we have to take the taqleed or the copying as a stage towards the liberation of the Muslim mind from copying. I don't think that it is like, of course, in terms of the methodology, the methodology is clearly against taqleed and is with studying history with a critical eye, benefiting from history and building on it. But sometimes I find myself in a situation where you have to start from where people know, what people know. I'm not compromising my methodology, but I start from what people know and end to where I know. When I was, for example, in Deoband, I gave some lectures there, and the students were angry, by the way, and some of them stood and they closed down the course in the middle of the course, even though I had my beard longer and I wore my kurta and I had all the superficial stuff that they want. I didn't go with the suit, But, and I started from the premises of the Hanafi fiqh. So I started from istihsan. When they asked, the muhadara in Deoband was, what is maqasid? ما هي المقاصد وكيف كذا? So I started, and I was speaking to them in Arabic there, in Sarampur and in Deoband, in the area where Deoband is really hegemonic. So I started with al-istihsan al-Hanafi. And I mentioned that why did Imam Abu Hanifa go to istihsan versus al-qiyas? إذا استقبح القياس استحسن. Why is qiyas qabih sometimes? Because it goes against maslahah. And then I said, okay, why don't we start by thinking about a maslahah? And this would be an extension of the istihsan. So this is an example of trying to bring people from where they are, take their hands, especially if they were students, take their hands to where you are. And you could start with some taqleed, and Imam Ibn Taymiyyah said, and Imam Shatibi said, Imam Ibn Qayyim said, but you have to be able to not to make them slaves of taqleed. So here is the difference between the teaching and the research and the thought. The thought has to be methodologically free from taqleed. And we have to train the students to be free from taqleed. But pedagogically speaking, I think it could make some sense to take the students. Now, when you refer to the past, there are scholars of the past who had nonsensical ideas that people copy. And there are scholars of the past who said some bright stuff that we can copy. There is a difference between even the ideas of the same scholar. You know, there is an Ibn Taymiyyah in Iqtida' al-Sirat al-Mustaqim who says that jins al-Arab afdal min khayrihi min ghayrihi min al-ajnas. You know, that the Arabic race is higher than any other race, and that a non-Arab cannot lead an Arab in prayers and so on. That is one side of Ibn Taymiyyah. And there is an Ibn Taymiyyah who talks about the maslahah and so on. And there is another Ibn Taymiyyah that talks about the history, and he is not fair when he deals with the history between the Sahaba and so on. But he had some other ideas in the family law that were very good. And therefore, if you know Ibn Taymiyyah well, you know what to choose. There is a difference between Ibn Taymiyyah and his student, At-Tufi. At-Tufi, to me, is more advanced in terms of fiqh. And Ibn al-Qayyim, to me, is more advanced. Really, I studied their fiqh and their usul. But what to choose, you see. There is a difference when you go back between the different scholars of the past, who some of them had, you know, very weird. So just the idea that we could have parallel strategies, even though methodologically speaking, I think we need to stick to the no taqleed kind of policy. I did not do any taqleed in that new book. I thought that it is not right to talk about methodology, and I do taqleed. And I go back and I say, Wallahi, I'm proposing this because Al-Shafi'i said, or Malik or Ibn Taymiyyah. I thought that, no, this is not, I'm not going to do that here. I have to really be genuine because I'm talking about the manhaj at the core of the tasawwur. Now, your second question, I see Dr. Basma answering it here. A small note that qist and adl are not one and the same. And the deen is one. I'll consider the third one to be a question, and I will discuss it. But if you would like to take the answer of that, a deen is one of these concepts that we cannot separate from life. Yes, okay. I'm aware, I don't want to speak on her behalf, but I'm aware of her critique of the traditional maqasid. Would you like to say it, Ya Doctora, or me to present it? Her critique, which I agree with, of the traditional maqasid, amongst other critiques, is that separating a deen from everything else is not accurate, because a deen is overriding. And her critique as well is about hifz al-mal, that hifz al-mal is not one of the highest maqasid. It is actually infaq al-mal. You know, when we deal with the Quran, really, it is spending of the wealth, not the preservation of the wealth. And what I wrote in some of my writings is that these are maqasid al-fiqh, not maqasid al-sharia. All the way to Imam al-Shatibi and all the way to Ibn Ashur, really, died in the 70s of the previous century, that maqasid al-sharia they dealt with fiqh as in jurisprudence, as in juridical theory. And they did not deal with maqasid al-Islam or maqasid al-Quran. And they did not say that. They did not say that. Shatibi didn't say that I studied the Quran and here is the theory. He said, I studied tafasil al-Sharia. And what he meant by Sharia is the fiqh in the legal sense. And therefore, حفظ الدين والنفس والعقل is a theory for fiqh in the historical sense, and not a theory for fiqh in the current sense. Fiqh in the current sense that deals with all the disciplines, the 5 or 6 maqasid are not enough, really. And they are not going to help us to build a theory or deal with a contemporary question. And they will be really, if you, I'm just saying theory, not theory, but anyway, they are not going to give us a theory that we can apply to disciplines. You see, this is not going to be possible with the 5 or 6. We are not saying that they are wrong, but they are very limited, very partial. Another, and of course, Dr. Zaid, another note here, yes, is that qist and adl are not one and the same. Jazakallah khair, in the Jazakallah khair, Doctora, that translation-wise, al-qist would be justice and al-adl would be equity. So this would be, Dr. Zaid, please. Qist, equity, and adl is justice. Oh, I said otherwise? Okay. I'm just, okay. Dr. Zaid, please.
Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuhu. Again, in the spirit of just having this discussion and this safe space for all of us, inshallah, I just would love to add a few comments. One is, if I would quickly touch on this issue of the 5 maqasid. One is that even the current definition and the way that the definition of the 5 maqasid has been expanded in recent times, that creates a huge problem for traditionalists, because what they mean by hifdh al-mal is a lot narrower than what you're talking about or what we are talking about here. And what we mean, the same thing with hifdh al-nafs and hifdh al-deen, and all they have very strict fiqhi definition, legalistic, and is usually extremely just focused on Muslims and Islamic faith, and then so this already has been like we're really trying very hard to blow up these meanings and include so many things and tuck it underneath these 5 principles. So even there's a lot of like if you go really by what is standard fiqhi approaches, there's a lot of debate there, or like it may not be accepted by the establishment. So then that is one thing. The other thing is that why is this a big deal? So for example, if let's not make this as any kind of obstacle, because it's really artificial obstacle. So the focus is that what is the problem or the challenge we are trying to address? What is this holistic and cohesive and inspirational approach to Al-Quran and Sunnah and our primary sources that really answers the problems and bring in a new insight, a new knowledge? And what are this objective and maqasid, even if you call it juz'iyya or not, like versus the high maqasid and kulliyat. What are these maqasid? And that will make real change, bring real solution to people's problems. And if we actually start producing that kind of new knowledge and actually try to apply it and see how it works, and if we can have what I'm calling these days falah stories, success stories, falah stories, then we get to the very last problem in my mind. Okay, well, can we tuck this in one of the 5 maqasid to please certain group or people or scholars? Inshallah, that will be probably an easy task to deal with at the end of this process. So let's not, I don't see that it's of critical importance, except in maybe some academic settings where they want things to be categorized and neat in a certain way. If I now would love to take one step back, and there are two issues that I would love to quickly address. Is that so of course the flip coin of what today's topic and chapter 2 is that then these these five critiques become what we pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, become the hallmark of the new maqasid methodology. So then in the face of taqlid, that we want to have this new renewal, then does that make sense that this has become the hallmark of the new maqasid methodology? It just stated in negative terms versus stated in, to critique and to highlight the challenges and the current reality versus what we envision and we hope and pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to achieve. In the face of tajzi, we're talking about holism, and in the face of tabrir, this is kind of interesting but in my language, when I talk to people, I say there is inspirational Islam, that so when we talk and we present an Islamic idea, we are really motivated, we are burning with this truth, and that we would love to share with the world, and the solutions. So and tanaqud, of course, we have coherent, and that's the issue, and then with tafkik there is holism. So we have holism and holism here. So that can become the. Do you see this become the also the five element that describes the new maqasid methodology, Sheikh Jasser? The last issue. This is at some level is just like a discussion of strategy, and but maybe it has an element of our understanding of reality. So when we talk about, so who are these Muslims we are talking about, and what about humanity? Because Islam is a message to all of humanity. And sometimes when we discuss whether maqasid approach, whether Islam, our role in the world, and our mission and call in this world, we are very, very limited in our view to typically to Muslims. And actually within Muslims, we are really talking about the people who are now popularly being referred to as the mosqued people, who are actually go to the mosque and care about the establishment Islam. And it will be very instructive if we have some kind of data on this issue. My rough estimate is that when we talk about mosqued Muslim, those who actually care about what the imams in the mosque say, they range from 5 to 10% in where Muslims are minority, especially in the West, like America, where secularism is high even within Muslims. Atheism is high within Muslims. So we're talking about really 5 to 10%, while the 90% of these Muslims are out there doing all kind of being happily postmodern Muslims, and then propagating that as what they think is Islam, all the way to range of maybe some even where Muslims are majority, maybe that rate is even not more than 50%. Maybe throwing that number out will be good to critique, but at the end of the day, I believe that there is a vast majority, even within Muslims, who hunger and need a new approach that make Islam transfer Islam into an inspirational, holistic, a tool for renewal, a tool that, or a methodology, and that connects with reality. So sometimes from a strategy point of view, we are really forgetting the vast majority of even Muslims by focusing so much on the establishment and the focusing on the approval, possibly approval of the establishment versus our responsibility and the one of the great maqsad that we deliver this message to all of humanity. Now, once we talk about humanity, then we're talking about an even much bigger pool of people that we have totally ignored. So that is one issue. At a more kind of a what do you call thought level, and just Islamic understanding level, this issue of firaq and jama'at, I mean, it has existed throughout the world, And when we talk about, and even currently, when we talk about those who are mosque, who are the traditional or like establishment Islam, well, we have witnessed that how it's there are so many orientations. There is the Deobandi and the Salafi and the Sufi and so on and so forth, you know, and the Taqlidis and by so there is already massive amount of division within all these groupings. So here the issue is that um, how do we understand the new maqasid methodology? Uh, what does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala want from us? Like, is this going to be simply yet another group, another sect? Why would this be? What would make it a unifying factor? Or should we really focus on us being a unifying of this school or even this thought? Does it have, how does it need to have, what is built in this methodology that tried to reconcile versus simply stating strongly, boldly that, you know, FGM is wrong and there's no compromise. I'm not going to really sugarcoating it. Rape is a crime. We're not going to sugarcoat it or in any form or shape. In this case, you know, فاصدع بما تؤمر, you know, like, you know, and then خلاص, state your opinion and then and focus on directing the message to the masses of humanity that needs to hear this message and the masses of Muslims that need to hear this message rather than worry about being another sect. والله أعلم.
ما شاء الله. جزاك الله خير دكتور زيد. I will not be limited by the time, inshallah. I will answer your questions. We are in the industry of ideas. We are manufacturing ideas. We are not solving problems. This institute, the way I envisioned, you know, as somebody who participated in founding it, is to create thought, and for that thought to be genuine, to be Islamically genuine, and to go beyond the errors that we have in the mainstream cultures that we belong to that are against Islam. It is essential from my perspective to believe in the importance and the significance and the power of ideas. And ideas matter. Ideas matter. They change history, they change societies, and this is where we work. We are not a social movement that is trying to change governments or whatever. We are not trying to be as popular as we want. This is not our industry. We're trying to make ideas that are going to make a change in the world. And therefore, there are a number of problems that we suffer from that I would like to highlight here. Number one is the paralyzation of academia in today's world. Academia in today's world is not important. Academia is a slave of the economic system. And therefore, when people look at academic exercises as what exactly are the problems that the academic exercise is going to solve, this is actually based on a misdefinition of the problem. And it, through academic exercise, should reshape the worldview, which we are going to talk about next, and deal with the problems based on the worldview that the academic exercise is going to shape. The academic exercise does not consider itself, should not consider itself to be a service, because if it is a service, it will solve misdefined problems. Of course, it has to solve problems. I talked about 5 problems today, but we need to target the right problems, not the superficial problems. One of the problems that we have in contemporary thought is the authority of numbers. That numbers are supposed to mean truths, but numbers are not truths, and numbers are gauges of the impact of concepts. And these concepts are often misdefined. So when we say that 10% of the people are mosqued, for example, how do we define a mosque? And who are these people? And what do they do? And when we say that we want to be genuine to the Quran and Sunnah, are we targeting this group? This is not, this has nothing to do with working on the ideas, you see. Yes, in the reality, mosques have problems and people go to the mosque, and many other people, we need to approach them. So, but this is not, the popularity of the idea is not important. What is important is how much it is founded in the truth. And then whether it is successful, it has falah. Dr. Jazakallah khair, it's a great program. We're trying to say that we have great stories of falah. That is great. But we define al-falah, obviously, based on our criteria, not based on what people think is al-falah. That is important. But the power of the numbers is one of the problems that the social media brought. And that especially, and I'm sitting in Canada here, not far from that, especially the American culture has interjected in the human mind as a gauge for truth. And truth is not the numbers. Truth is the revelation. And does the revelation contradict with numbers? Yes. وَمَا أَكْثَرُ النَّاسِ وَلَوْ حَرَصْتَ بِمُؤْمِنِينَ وَمَا أَكْثَرُ النَّاسِ وَلَكِنَّ أَكْثَرَ النَّاسِ لَا يَشْكُرُونَ وَمَا يُؤْمِنُ أَكْثَرُهُم بِاللَّهِ إِلَّا وَهُم مُشْرِكُونَ. Those 100 units that we are discussing as a target, we should know that most of them are mushrik. The Quran is saying. And therefore, it's not really our concern. I'm trying, of course, we can have more discussions and so on to the nitty-gritty of the details, but I'm just trying to stress the fact that ideas matter, that academics, this is not an academic exercise. This is an exercise of identity. I'm speaking English, which is really hindering me from expressing. This is an exercise of التصور, of الإيمان, of العقل, of العلم. This is the exercise for these things. And these things, when they are misdefined, they become a major problem. And I see Islamic organizations everywhere misdefining their premises and their knowledge base and end up serving hegemonies. And they are not supposed to be. And end up causing more harm than what they are supposed to do. To answer the particular questions, why is this a big deal? حفظ المال or حفظ النفس, because this is the structure of the maqasid. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent this book with a number of maqasid that are not حفظ الدين والنفس والمال والعقل والعرض. This is a theory that had its history. It developed for the sake of theorization, started by Al-Juwayni. And if you study Juwayni properly, his siyasa and his philosophy of the time made him produce this. But this theory is used today as a tool for all sorts of apologetic powers, really, that are trying to ride on the wave of the maqasid in order to justify. So it's using it today the way it is wrong from my perspective. I'm quite against it, even though I know I wrote about it. I taught courses about it, but this is wrong to use this as a theory of maqasid. And it is important that we use the theory of maqasid that is the Quranic theory, because the Quranic theory is much more closer to the truth that we are going to use. So could the hallmark of the methodology be that it is non-apologetic and holistic? And yeah, we can use these words if they make sense. As I mentioned, there is a difference between students and talking about the methodology. If you have a student, if you have a khutbah in the masjid, you could give a khutbah on حفظ العرض وحفظ المال and try to redefine it. That is fine. But if you are talking about methodology, if you are teaching scholars, as I'm doing here, inshallah, yani, where scholars are going to take this and teach and do things and believe things to start with, then no, we cannot use the limitations of the contemporary scholarship as the basis or as the hallmark. Excuse my English, I don't know what hallmark is, but not like if you're talking about PR, I don't know, we can do many things with our videos and so on. But if you're talking about the methodology itself, no, the methodology itself is based on the Quran and Sunnah and the maqasid al-Quran and the critique of the Sunnah, of the Prophet, the narrations, in that sense. How can this be a unifying factor? By calling people back to the revelations. That's what we're trying to do. That's what the prophets did. The prophets, they called the people to the revelation. And the common ground that is unifying was أَلَّا نَعْبُدَ إِلَّا اللَّهِ وَلَا نُشْرِكَ بِهِ شَيْئًا. The common ground was the word of Allah. So that is what we're calling for. Most people will not believe in us. That is fine. That's the nature of the beast. I don't know if you want to follow up, Doctor. Did I address your issues? And perhaps any other?
This one quick. I mean, there can be definitely, like I said, this is a safe space. So one thing here is that we're saying that Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. The lecture today discussed the taqlidis and you're discussing the existing schools of thought, the existing trends in the Muslim world, and you address them because they have presence in reality and in our in our environment or within Muslims. They have authority within Muslims, and that's why you discussed this. I mean, that's why it was important to mention by name the Diobandi and how you approach your conversation with them, because they are a reality and they're popular, so they merited that conversation that is specifically talking about them. So then these are part of the, yeah, we can go over the definition of what masked and this and that, but for me that they are the masked people, the postmodernist Muslim. Yeah, these are very important trend that are affecting today's world. They are the Ilhan Omars and and so on and so forth of the world, who are really defining Islam and popularizing a certain version of Islam, and then and they use certain literature to support their points of view. So here, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So the issue is that yes, we have we want to be authentic to a Quran and Sunnah, but then we also are engaging with the world and the current ideas in the world, and then we have to manage that and these ideas, what we engage with in the world based on the trends, and we prioritize what exists, what the trend that exists. And then we go to the issue of numbers. I'm sure we are talking about two different things here. uh, Numbers, they are not taken on its own. All surveyors and this tell you that you don't just look at raw numbers, you look at insights and people who actually know the story behind the numbers to translate the numbers into information into insight into knowledge. So, but I think we need to be careful when we discuss numbers, because there are vital statistics. A doctor looks at your vital statistics, then make a full judgment on your situation, not purely based on the numbers, but based on all his knowledge. But the doctor does not ignore your vital statistics. So when I start and I talk about 10% of Muslims approximately are mosqued, and the rest 90% are not, that this is a reality. In America, over 50% of Muslims approve of homosexual, gay marriage and that stuff. That is a reality. So you can combine it with other situation to tell us that this is what we are dealing with, and that connects with, are we trying to solve problems? I mean, so what is the purpose of all this knowledge if not to address the challenges and problems that humanity and Muslims are facing? So this is not a purely academic exercise. Then that will be a whole different, the purpose and the benefit of this will. I'm sure that's not what you're saying, because all your life you address problems on a daily basis. But the whole issue is how can we approach these problems from a solid, authentic methodology with a hallmarks. Hallmarks here are features. What are the features of this new maqasid methodology approach? Well, these are hopefully the other side of the critiques that we have subjected the existing attempts to answer today's problems, or to present today's Islam today, which is like التجزئة والتفكيك والتقليد. So we are trying to address today's problems using a new maqasid methodology that has these main features that hopefully rises over the challenges that we have in today's world.
I'm just talking about the level of approaching the issues. There are different levels of approaching a reality. The level that we are concerned with as a think tank is the level of ideas and methodologies, approaches. The level of the approach, we work on the approach. How do people think, and how do they act, and how organizations build strategies? Of course, there are different levels of existence. So when we deal with Islamic thought today, we are not dealing with schools. We are not naming them. I gave the Deoband as an example just to put you in a context. But we will never say, okay, we have 5 schools, Al-Wasati and Deobandi. And no, because this is a level of discourse that is not about the approach. So I agree with you, Dr. Zaid, but I am just saying that the approach is that we are dealing with ideas. We are dealing with foundational ideas, and of course numbers is one of those. Like, there is a difference between talking about statistics at a certain level and the philosophy that you come from. You see, even when you talk about numbers, I happen to be a systems guy. I studied theory of numbers. My point is there are different levels of numbers. Like, for example, I go to the doctor, right? And the symptoms and the 50%, and you have deficiency in iron and so on. That level of medicine is what we are trying to solve or to change, because Western medicine in general is dealing with the human defined in a way that these numbers are going to be. Do I have a sickness? Yes, of course. If the number is low, I have to take iron. But this is not, when we are dealing, we are criticizing medicine itself for defining the human this way, and for defining health this way, and for having the system of hospitals like that, and so forth. So we are dealing with the basic ideas of medicine, or the basic ideas of economics, which you would be very familiar with, or the basic ideas of fiqh or jurisprudence, for that matter.
not with the particular fatwa which would solve somebody's problem. What are the usul? So I'm just saying I agree with you 100%, but I'm talking at a different, more fundamental level of ideas. I want to get, I don't want to skip any questions, subhanAllah. And mashallah, you have, so Dr. Basma answered the qist and adl. What are the ethics of this agreement? Do you want me to take the written questions? Or?
I do. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. Please go ahead.
زي حضرتك يا دكتور.
أهلا.
I'm sorry for closing the camera, but I'm just like, because my father came out of the hospital yesterday, so I'm just caring between him and like continuing the class. So I'm sorry for that.
ألف سلامة.
So الله يسلم حضرتك. طيب. I do have a question concerning also the point of you raised concerning Dr. Ali Jum'a, and that he was actually refusing the idea of renewal concerning the maqasid, 5 pillars and so on, because actually that's it's not the first time for me to be facing this point from a high level scholar. And for me, Ali Jum'a is aside from other things, he's one. It's not a normal scholar. He's a big alim. So I wasn't actually expecting that he was also taking the same direction of refusing the renewal direction in the maqasid. So my question actually, because I think this is a very critical thing for me, for myself, concerning also the research and so on. Why kind of scholar like Ali Jum'a and others actually in this level of ilm, refusing the renewal in the maqasid and sticking to a theory, which is a theory, it's what has been produced formally from other scholars is a theory. It's not something really like a hadith or a Quran, which is stated, and we are actually debating around it. We are debating around the theories from scholars, from men, هم رجال ونحن رجال. My question is why exactly is this? What are the bases? ما هو المستند؟ هم يستندون إلى ماذا when they are sticking to not renewing this field and area? Because also what I understand, for me, the renewal in the field of maqasid of what especially you are doing, Dr. Jasser, is a very big thing concerning what we are facing now. I mean, like Dr. Zaid have mentioned, also concerning the multi-sexual marriage and so on. And it's not only this big problem, other problems which has also we are facing in the source of the new generations and so on. It's not going to be solved unless we have like a complete methodology showing people that the maqasid of Sharia is really connecting, and that it's not only concerned with those 5 pillars, it's also connected to other levels. It's connected to many levels of your social life, and it's like a ball. It's like a whole a holistic thing which is connected, and that's why it's very important for us to stress on its renewal. So it's a question and comment at the same time.
I will try to be precise, inshallah, my answers, because I see some very important questions. All of the questions are important, inshallah, but just some questions that really require our discussion. To answer your question, Doctora, why do the scholars defend the methodology they come from? The methodology they come from is taqleed, is to copy, and therefore it is a methodological. Of course, Sheikh by the level of Sheikh Ali or would know that the Quran has different maqasid. He wrote about this, but he also wrote about rejecting the renewal in some areas because he's preserving the usul that he comes from. And a legitimate concern could be that he doesn't want modernist ideas to invade that space. And then we are talking about human rights and so forth. And but also there could be some
just briefly some politics behind it, you know. To go to Sheikh Nuru's question, do you want me to read? Sheikh, I read the question, but you want to express it, and then perhaps I could comment on it, inshallah.
Okay. Well, I think it was more a comment that from my humble experience here, where we've got a very strong Maliki Taqlidi environment, once we have introduced people to even the fundamentals of usul, and they understand that when you are presenting an argument, when any scholar is presenting an argument, that there has to be an usul to the fiqh. And it's either your argument is based on the Quran or on a hadith or Amal Ahl al-Madina or something else, istishab, maslaha, sahabi, etc., etc. But the key point there is, in the usul of fiqh of every madhab, there is no such thing as the ra'i of the alim. There's always the, what does the alim base his evidence on, is what the school has accepted. And so we found that a very useful inroad in helping people stop insisting that Ibn Rushd or Al-Baji or Imam Malik or whatever has to back a position, that we're able to do what the Mujtahid scholars did, which is to look at what did they base their arguments on. So I was just making that point, that what we have found useful in countering the taqlid approach has really been to help them understand the usul of their own madhab. On the issue to do with Sheikh Ali Juma, which you mentioned, I think you've also mentioned Ibn Taymiyyah would hold some strange opinions on a particular topic, and every scholar was a human being and had their own limitations. Ibn Taymiyyah broadened the number of maqasid, and Shatibi also didn't limit it to just the 5. Some put ird, some put nasal, some put nasab, Ibn Ashur put ahl. So I think just even the fact that these classifications are human classifications, just the fact that the terminology, is adl, to be looked upon as a universal or as a partial, or is it infused in everything? Does it stand alone? The moment we accept that this is all human articulation, useful in one context, less useful in another context, we respect the diversity, we don't let it become academic. As you said in the last episode, when it comes to definition, a definition of a thing would be tied to the purpose and the related web of meanings that, help solve whatever the problem is. So I feel, with the case of Ali Juma, that's his opinion. He is not an usul of fiqh. He has given his opinion, and part of the holism that I think we are learning here is to not, this is the only answer, but it is part of the opinions. We agree to disagree agreeably, inshallah. Wallahu alam.
Jazakallah khair. Jazakallah khair. I just add that the usul al-fiqh, the way they are taught and understood today, are limited to jurisprudence. They are limited to speak English, the ethics. But Islam is much wider than that. And that is why we are trying to reconstruct the usul here, in the sense that we are trying to widen the circle of the usul. Because the usul, yes, they are one of those levels that I'm talking about that you can go to that is better than the level of taqlid. But the level of usul is still an ideology that boxes Islam within the juridical circle and does not allow Islam to deal with the wider circle of life of institutions and states and societies and cultures and so on, because it is still looking at Islam from a secular perspective, in the sense that the usul is going to be the ethical theory of Islam. But Islam is much wider than ethics. So I'm just adding that that part of what we do, yes, we can speak with those scholars on that level. As I was telling Akhi Dr. Zaid, we can speak with the people at the level they understand of statistics. But our critique is deeper than that, because the concepts themselves that they use in the usul, or the concepts themselves that they use in the survey, when they survey people, the question itself, when they take people's impressions, the question itself, there are words that are loaded. Are you happy? You know, and then it becomes that people are pleased, but people might not be pleased. People might be enslaved, but they don't know, or they whatever. Or are you, you know, are you healthy? And the person is so unhealthy, but he says, yeah, I'm fine. You know, how do you define health? And how do you define maslaha? For example, if you're talking usul, how do you define that maslaha that people are talking about? Is deeper than the usul in terms of, and then the Malikiya and the Ahnaf and so on. I'm afraid it becomes part of a national identity that doesn't really serve Islam. You know, it helps divide Muslims more. How Shafi'iyya is dealt with in East Asia, for example, how the Malikiyya is in North Africa. I noticed that, of course, I mean, could study a madhab and so forth, but it's us and them kind of thing. And Islam is way beyond that and beyond history anyway. Imam Malik would not have agreed to this today. Imam Malik would have not agreed to calling a fiqh by his name like that. And Allah Alam, I'm just, okay. Let's take brother, Dr. Ildus. He sent something, and then Brother Yahya, inshallah. Dr. Ildus, what is the ethics of this agreement with taqleed on our part, especially in an environment where there is Islamic authority in certain parts of the world, where Muslims are in majority? Yeah, this issue of Islamic authority is part of that taqleed issue, Dr. Ildus, that I'm talking about, because you know, some states decide that they have a madhab, and then they form a religious authority within the government that is responsible for Islam, right? And that is part of the politics of the government itself. The government would like, and I'm not saying the government is ill-intentioned or whatever, even if they are good-intentioned, the method of having a religious authority in a government is not Islamic. We're not supposed to have an Islamic department in a Muslim government, because that is ulama al-sultan that we talked about in the past. In the present, I'm not saying that all of them are ulama al-sultan, but working for a government has to be the special case in the ulama and not the official case. You know, some ulama might, like Imam al-Zuhri I mentioned, but during the time of Imam al-Zuhri, the Imams of Islam remained the Imams of Islam, you know, Shafi'i and so on, and, you know, the others, like more or less during that period, and Malik, of course, and in the beginning, and then and Shafi'i and so forth. They remained independent from the governments because they knew that serving Islam has to be independent. Now, the direction with nation states, they are nationalizing Islam. If you are not part of Dar al-Ifta or the fatwa body in our country, that is the government body, you're not even allowed to give fatwa. It's a crime. Some countries have a prison sentence for that. If you give a fatwa and you are not part of the fatwa council, the official of the government. But the person in the fatwa council in Arabia or in wherever it is, Algeria, is not necessarily part of the government, but he's alim and one of the great alims of Islam. So why doesn't he give a fatwa? Because the fatwa is nationalized. And eventually even the Islamic education becomes nationalized. And that is the problem I have with taqleed with this. So now Dr. Yahya, please.
Assalamu alaikum. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Of course, I agree with everything you said, but I think there is another aspect as well to explain why some people Like we talked about Ali Juma. I don't talk about him personally, but this kind of so-called traditionalist people.
Sheikh Ali, but alhamdulillah, yeah, inshallah, no problem. Please go ahead.
I mean, that's a common trend, I think. And I think there is a third reason, another reason to explain the behavior, as far as I understood. A lot of people, Muslim scholars, they emphasize on the spiritual improvement, and I think they want to protect the deen. So they call themselves traditionalists, and they are against everything which would appear as a reformist vision, for the reason that they think that Islam is under threat nowadays, and they think that in order to protect the substance of Islam and the spiritual outcomes, they need to protect the whole body. So they don't like people to tackle some fiqh issues or even aqidah issues if we criticize the traditional school of Ash'ari or Maturidi, whatever. And I think that the reason of some of these people when talking about them, that's why in Turuq, in Tasawwuf, you find the people who are the more inclined to defend the traditional fiqh, even if it doesn't make sense. And when we talk to them, we see that they don't even believe in that sometimes, somehow. They may follow rules, for them it doesn't make sense, but they think it's very important to protect the whole body, and they're afraid that if we discuss of a rule, for instance, we talk about fiqh of zakat, if we change the fiqh of zakat, they are afraid that later on we change other part of traditions, and that people are confused, and that they leave the whole Islamic tradition. I think that's a very kind of protection they have, at least the one who are sincere with their positions, and that they just want to protect the whole body, to use Islam as a vehicle to achieve other spiritual goals. I don't know if my claim is clear or not, but
I totally agree with you, and I would add that this has been the case from the middle of the 1st century, Hijri, I mean. From the middle of the 1st century, when the Khilafah became a kingdom, the majority of Muslim scholars wanted to protect the basic pillars of Islam from the hegemony of the forces. And of course, different times and different forces and different governors, it's very complex. But the general approach of the Muslim scholars is to protect the basic pillars of the deen, what they call the deen. But there is a minority of scholars everywhere that try to expand the influence of the deen and try to propose renewals for the society and for the civilization to move forward and to be, and they were not as protective. Those innovative scholars are the scholars that I wish that we all be part of, that group of scholars that is not concerned about the protection of the basic pillars of Islam. Inshallah, the basic pillars of Islam are going to continue, and there will always be people who memorize the Quran and so on. In the beginning, they were very protective about the letter of the Quran. Ubay ibn Ka'b said, you change anything. If you're going to change this harf, there was a harf in one of the ayat, long story. He told them, I will carry my sword now. My sword is at home. But if you change the Quran, I'm going to carry my sword. So the scholars they see a lot of corruption happening, but they say, well, as long as the script of the Quran is protected, and as long as the 5 pillars are protected, and let us not go further than that, and let us save the blood of the people and so on. What we are trying to do is to say, let us try to empower the ummah by going back to the original way of thinking, and let us add to the contribution of these scholars. Yes, the scholars of today, they don't want to rock the boat of the economy or the state or the academic system or any of that. And I appreciate their motives, I guess, but I am very much for rocking the boats of these things, because I see that the bigger picture is a broken system. And I'm not expecting every scholar to say that. I'm expecting a very few number. But I think that a very few number is enough to challenge the fundamental core of the bigger system. Because if I understand the Sunan properly, the universal laws, I think we are in a circle of the world firing back because of corruption. ظهر الفساد في البر والبحر. And I think that reading history, we're just talking about that yesterday with Dr. Basma about the history of plagues. She's reading a very interesting book, and she was sharing. And basically, plagues and natural disasters, if you wish, they come at times of major change in history. I've been saying this for the past 5 years, that major changes are going to come, and we are going to need a new and fresh approach to Islam. And that is what we're working on. When a percentage of the population of the world dies, when the internet is no longer, when we can no longer fly, when whatever it is, AI takes us wherever it's taking us, and people feel that we need to renew the system, and there will be some receivers of that knowledge that believe that we need to build on a new fundamental. I think that is when this comes in. So again, back to the levels issue. We can talk about the levels of cohabitation and living nicely in the society and democracy and so on. But we can talk about the levels of scholars and reshaping their usul based on the maqasid. But I'm talking about the fundamental level of knowledge that is at the core of the current system, that I think is taking us to a renewal, because it's going to be soon facing a big wall. Wallahu a'lam. That's what I'm adding.
Well, I totally agree with you, and I just say that to respond to the sister before, to try to explain the motivation of such people. And I think what they do made sense 50 years ago, but now it's totally wrong. Also because of the spreading of internet and the spreading of Islamic sources, everybody can read whatever he wants. And this methodology was from before, especially in Tasawwuf circles. The Sheikh said, it's not your problem, so don't talk about the cutting heads, whatever. It's not your stuff. You're not a faqih, you're not a ruler. And a lot of issues were hidden for the common interest 50 years ago. But I think a lot of people, they are still in this approach. That's why they want to hear for every other vision of Islam, which is wrong. And I totally agree with the approach you promote here. Just try to imagine why they resist to this. Maybe just another short comment about the Taqlid problem. According to my observations in Latin America and in Europe as well, I found out a lot of people following one path, not for rational reasons, but more for opportunities. I had the chance to talk about that with Dr. Zaid. In Colombia, for instance, you find a lot of people following the Shia movement. It's not a matter of history. It's not a matter of what happens between Muawiyah, Ali, so on. It's a matter of funding a mosque, funding money, funding opportunities to studies. And I think you find today many people stuck in Taqlid because that's just the mosque they have found. They found that mosque, they found that specific opportunity to study Islam, maybe the group, the friends, and then you find them following a path for 10 or 15 years, which is another side of the problem, another way to understand the situation. Not from the text, not from the history, but from the realities of people. And I think that's another issue we can think about.
Yeah. I hope you, inshallah, you allow me to just go through the ideas of the next chapter. And I am sure that there could be a lot of discussion. I am benefiting from this discussion and from the comments, and thank you for all the participants in the chat, because this is a parallel chat that is using our time in a more efficient way, inshallah. Jazakumullah khair. I am just wanted, and I see this related to what we are talking about, the importance of reorienting the Islamic worldview. So we cannot really talk about a methodology before we come from a different worldview. In science, they call it the paradigm shift, just for a recent kind of, the recent kind of literature, if you want to read on that. But basically, it is about how we can redefine the fundamental premises of a discipline in order for the discipline to make strides in the future. We really cannot do this with Islamic studies, and we cannot really propose new Islamic studies, as we are going to do in the last chapter, and discuss phenomena studies and so forth, and new kinds of usul that builds on the usul. We cannot really do that before we revise our worldview. In Islam would be التصور. الحكم على الشيء فرع عن تصوره. I talked about that last time. But basically, what are the elements of this worldview? This is what the chapter is dealing with. And the chapter is dealing with scholarship, knowledge, and reality. And these are the three elements. Usually in other disciplines, people will start with the epistemology and ontology and logic and so forth. People will start with the Greek philosophical division of philosophy, basically, of ideas, philosophical ideas. And therefore, in the epistemology, they will talk about sources of knowledge and so forth, and they'll get deep into this. With the logic, they're going to get into the different schools of logic and approaches. And with ontology, they are going to discuss things related to the existence, نظرية الوجود in Arabic. But this is different. This is not epistemology, ontology, and logic, because epistemology in Islam, we call it ilm, we call it knowledge, and or ma'rifah for the latest Islamic thought productions. And I use the word ilm rather than ma'rifah, though, because ilm is more is Quranic. The Quran doesn't use ma'rifah in that sense. فَدَخَلْ عَلَيْهِ فَعَرَفَهُمْ, recognize, ma'rifah. But ilm, that's why there is a lot on ilm in there, and a lot of knowledge in the Quran, in order to give us a basis. How is knowledge defined in the Quran? The source of knowledge is not a problem, and is not a philosophical question in Islam. The source of knowledge is al-wahy, and is al-khalq. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave us the ability to seek knowledge and to get knowledge. وَاللَّهُ أَخْرَجَكُمْ بِبُطُونِ أُمَّهَاتِكُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ شَيْئًا. We come out with no knowledge, and then we gain knowledge. وَجَعَلْ لَكُمُ السَّمْعَ وَالْأَبْصَارَ وَالْأَفْئِدَةَ. So we gain knowledge with hearing, seeing, and comprehending with our hearts, right? But what is the hegemonic knowledge? Is there a hegemonic knowledge? Yes, there is. And who cares about the postmodern approach that there is no knowledge that is hegemonic, and who defines Islam and all of that? No, this is postmodernism. In Islam, who defines Islam? The Quran and Sunnah. And who reads the Quran and Sunnah? People of knowledge. Not necessarily fuqaha with amamas, not necessarily, but people of knowledge. They read the Quran and Sunnah. But these people will have subjective. No, but Islam doesn't do subjective versus objective. Islam considers the Quran and Sunnah to be objective reality, right? And their ideas to be hegemonic. وَمُهَيْمِنًا عَلَيْكَ, to be hegemonic. Who and said what and so on. This is not the Quran and Sunnah. This is the scholar that reads the Quran and Sunnah will be influenced by that. But there is a difference here between Islam and Muslims in that sense. And Islam does have a reality and does have an existence that is different from the existence of Muslims. This is very important in the basic worldview of Islam, that as a Muslim, I don't come from a Muslim's perspective, I come from an Islamic perspective. And the Islamic perspective is going to reshape my idea. There are areas of gray, and there are areas of different opinions, but there are also areas of black and white. And that's what I'm talking about. The oneness of Allah is black and white. The prophethood of messengers and the revelation and the angels, and that's black and white. This is not. And the riba and zina, Allah forbid, and shirk and asnam and all of that, Allah forbid. This is black and white. This is not subject to reinterpretation. And the obligation of prayers and fasting, and the obligations of iffa and sidq and amana and so forth. So basically the elements that we are talking about, the basic ones or the core ones or the most central ones in the network are black and white and are the basis of knowledge that is going to shape the reality based on scholarship. And that is the relationship now between knowledge and reality is scholarship. So if we are doing scholarship, we are the bridge between knowledge and reality. We are going to be very deep in knowledge so that when we apply that knowledge to the reality, we are able to change the reality towards the objectives that we define in knowledge, not towards a misdefined objective. Yesterday I participated in something here in Canada, a seminar in Toronto, online. I tuned in and I found a scholar who's talking about the maqasid as a very important tool for a liberal society and promoting liberalism and promoting economic development and so forth. And I was really emotional about it because unfortunately she was quoting me on this. But it's not about that. We are not trying to push, in that sense, liberalism in a multicultural society. We could contribute to it, but this is not the basis of our knowledge. There is a difference between taking a higher level approach of Islam and trying to restructure Islam and restructure how Muslims behave in a multicultural society to be good citizens and to be good workers and to be good investors and so on, versus agreeing to the system necessarily, and especially as our sister mentioned yesterday, especially as she's talking about liberalism. She's talking about promoting liberalism through a maqasid perspective. And that is really not what we're trying to do here, because this is a different level of discourse that we talked about when we talked about Muslims being good citizens. If we are going to talk about the level of discourse of the philosophy of materialism in science or liberalism in society or whatever it is in economics or politics, no, that is now a different thing. So knowledge then, how it is defined, you can read the details. I'm sure you read them. But basically, the point here about logic in terms of knowledge. Now, if you look at knowledge, here is knowledge as a concept. There's some details. But basically, if you look at knowledge in terms of logic, you will see that the logic of the maqasid, the purposeful logic, is one of the shifts we need to do in our logical instruments of mind, because our logic is largely a causal logic when we think about medicine, when we think about science, and is rarely a teleological logic. I mean, to speak Latin, but really telos or teleology is not what we're talking about here, because it has a lot of ties in the Greek philosophy with their beliefs of the time. The teleology that we're talking about here is from a maqasid perspective. And we would like to shift the Muslim mind back to the maqasid being the motive of action and the reason of action versus the cause being the reason of action. And this has implications on everything. Medicine, for that matter. You take this medicine and you're going to be fine, right? Versus medicine itself as a thought. I'm not talking about an instrument or an operation. I'm talking about medicine as a thought, has a premise of achieving the well-being of humanity, not solving the problems of their sicknesses, because sicknesses could be misdefined if we do not define the purpose of medicine as achieving the well-being and defining the well-being properly. And if I have to go by the example, just to clarify, Other civilizations, for example, the Chinese and the Asians and so on, they have a different philosophy to medicine. I'm not calling for Chinese medicine. This is not, obviously, but I'm just saying that because they have a different philosophy for medicine and they define different objectives for medicine, their medicine could be more successful than Western medicine, where it's now statistics that 80, 90% of the cases of chemotherapy do not really work, right? And they really just elongate the suffering of the person, right? So I'm not saying that, again, do not take a chemotherapist. I'm not talking about the details. I'm talking about the logical basis of the idea that not every case would be requiring burning in the old medicine, and not every case would be requiring, you know, heavy antibiotic or chemotherapy as we're doing today, because medicine is defined as a business. And when medicine is defined in relation to the economics of medicine, then I studied engineering. Engineering is defined in relation to the economics of engineering. It is not defined in terms of the well-being. The design, you take a course in the ethics of design, and that's when you hear a little bit about the human well-being, right? In half of the course, as one of the schools of design. But you spend your bachelor's until you become a professor of engineering, and the well-being of humanity is not part of your training, is not part of your knowledge until you write a PhD, and you don't really discuss the philosophy of engineering, which is based on an economic framework, right? So I studied artificial intelligence. I studied that within a framework that was never questioned. Why are we doing this? You know, why are we trying to voice recognize and pattern recognize and so forth? Why are we trying to do that? I didn't ask these questions until I became a professor back in the University of Waterloo. And then I realized that our research is tied to research in a number of fields, primarily the military fields, in my particular case. But the why here became a very big question for me at that time. Why am I doing this? For some smart weapon? Okay, what is the smart weapon going to do? And then when you apply in academia for grants for the sake of more humane kind of objectives, you don't get the grants for that, let alone for basic science. Basic science is not funded, but even I'm talking about Canada, which is a very decent system, if you wish. And the social side of the Canadian system is very strong, let alone in other monstrous systems of academia, where no, you are part of a bigger machine. And you really cannot, in the Faculty of Medicine, question the basic premises of the medical field, the basic premises of the economic field, the basic medicine premises of anthropology, and how we define civilization, and so forth. And this is one of the objectives of the disciplinary studies that we would like to build on this, which is to build on the achievements that the disciplines had done in its natural sciences, applied sciences, social sciences. All of these are achievements. I'm not saying it's zero, but I'm just saying that there are some premises that come from a secular worldview that are problematic from an Islamic perspective. That if we are going to build an Islamic university or an Islamic scholar or an Islamic, how Islamic should that be? By the person who is going to be an Islamic scholar who deals with engineering. In my particular case, I can speak with a little bit of authority, is going to deal with engineering differently, because he or she defines design differently. And morality is not just going to be 1 or 2 lectures in the course that's called design ethics. It is going to be at the basis of the program itself, that is building an AI expert, or building a material engineer, or building a civil engineer. That bridge that you are designing and that city that you are designing, it is not enough to tell me it's green and so on. It's good. It's actually great if it's green, and that's fantastic. But at the basis of your design of the city or the bridge or the machine or the weapon for that matter, at the basis of that, what are you trying to design? And what are you doing with that? And these questions are not questions of the technology. Like in archaeology, I'm not questioning the carbon dating or whatever. That's a technology. That is fine. That's a tool. But I'm questioning the interpretation of the results of the carbon dating, which assumes a Darwinian worldview, where we came from apes and then we evolved into a Stone Age. And then after the Stone Age, and our language started as a proto, they say, a very primitive language, and then it developed, and then the language is, no. In Islam, we have a different understanding of the beginning of humanity, and we have a different history of language and of law and so forth. So when you talk about anthropology, whether social or archaeological, you are really talking about a science that takes a premise that comes from a particular worldview. So these are the whole of the chapter talking about the worldview. I spoke about the logic, here the conceptualizations. How do you conceptualize? If I am going to research something, as we know in the research that we are working on, a number of our scholars, I'll give an example again with Dr. Basma's scholarship, since she is not speaking today. The research that she is doing, intellectual property. Now, the concept of intellectual property, what she wrote in her book, I'm seeing the drafts, that when she realized that intellectual property is not a Quranic concept, then she started to question the concept itself. What is this about? And how can the hegemonic concept, al-asma' that al-sultan, when she applied that methodology in her research, how can the asma' of the Quran guide a definition of intellectual property? She didn't reject the intellectual property device altogether. And we're not, don't misunderstand me, I'm not calling for the rejection of what is in Western medicine, Western engineering. You know, I'm taught in that system and I believe in its use. But I'm just saying that if I do not find the concept that I am researching, I do not define exactly, I cannot find democracy in the Quran and Sunnah. So, okay, what is from the Quran and Sunnah that could guide democracy in a better way? She could not find intellectual property. What is in the Quran and Sunnah that could guide the intellectual property? And that is when the worldview comes in. My worldview that is deep is going to allow me to reconceptualize some of the concepts that we have. When we talk about development or tanmiyah, in the Quran, we have tijara, we have mal, we have dhahab and fidda, we have, and so forth. We have so many. Dr. Zaid could speak to this as a macroeconomist, right? But if I don't have the word stock markets, it doesn't mean it's bad, but how can I, from my worldview, redefine what this should be doing so that it could achieve better ends based on the objectives that I have intellectually? And the reality is going to take, as I'm saying, levels to change, and it's going to take, you know, a long time to restructure any of these systems. How do I define education, right? From the tarbiyah and the ilm that I have in the Quran, so that if I have an instrument in education or in pedagogy, or I was speaking the other day with a scholar of Arabic linguistics, and he was talking about some issues that he has in the teaching of the Arabic language, because they are borrowing the educational instruments of Western linguistics. I'm not saying they're all wrong or anything, but they are just imposing that in a way that's not compatible with the nature of the Arabic language. So he is borrowing tools that is taught in the context of teaching English, and he's trying to use the tools to teach Arabic. And I told him that as a scholar of Arabic, you should think differently. You should reverse the thinking and go back to your worldview as an Arabic scholar and go to the Quran and read it with a linguistic eye. And he is Hafiz, and he is, you know, somebody who is considered alim and so on. But he said he never thought about that. He said, I never read the Quran with a linguistics eye, you know. So this kind of thing that I'm talking about, that reorienting the worldview so that we can approach the issues at a deeper level. I'm not talking about the processes or the operational level. That is fine. We can deal with that on different parallel scenarios, but I'm talking about redefining the worldview. I want to stop here because I want to get your question, inshallah. Jazakumullah khair. Dr. Zaid, how we define human well-being. Exactly. Please go ahead, Doctor. Please go ahead.
Yeah, just so one thing is it becomes very tricky conversation here because when you say that well-being, from my study and analysis of well-being in economics, it came from, you know, Jeremy Bentham started talking about utility theory, and which is very mathematical based. So I mean, but for him that was the highest form of rationality. That is, if and why do we use rationality? Because the alternative, in my mind, this goes back now to Adam Smith. And then why is he talking about invisible hand? Because society, from his experiences, that's between two people telling people what to do, two groups. Like you have the clergy, the church, telling them what is right, what is wrong, what's halal, what's haram, and what's and that they were controlling their lives. And then you have the people in power, the king or whatever, who is trying to also to tell them what to do. So the solution out of this is, let's break all these constructs or all these authorities and let people, every at an individual level, decide what they want to do for themselves. So that's why, like, you know, self-interest comes into play. And then Jeremy Bentham is like, say, well, and one way to do this objectively now, but that still there is a public policy component here. Okay, and the way we can address public policy question is by, well, this general overall utility that we might try to find ways to measure. So the challenge here when we're saying that I have and maybe the way that was presented in the seminar here is that, well, they're not thinking about human well-being. I would like to say, well, they are thinking about human well-being, but um, they're trying to also keep, but this is their best approach or attempt to promoting well-being, given the historical experience and that they have witnessed and the problem they have witnessed before. This is the best way to address. When it comes to modern mainstream medicine, they want to be evidence-based, because the other, well, if you're not evidence-based, uh, Chinese acupuncture is not mainstream because they cannot. It's very hard to scientifically reproduce the results. So it does not become part of the mainstream. So the threshold, there's higher threshold to that was established by the, say, Western civilization for accepting new ideas, because the history of humanity is full of attempts to promote immature ideas or poorly supported ideas. So just we need to keep that in mind, so that in this methodology that we are envisioning, what is the threshold of testing new ideas? Why is this really promoting well-being? Might as well just becomes again one partialistic point of view that has many holes in it. Challenging the status quo, again, one thing is important to understand, and that I appreciate in Western civilization, challenging the status quo is very important for them. And they do that, for example, through the tenure system in colleges. You get your tenure, and then sometimes even your full professorship, and then you let it rip, and then you can produce ideas, generally speaking, that challenge the status quo. Behavioral economics was a huge challenge to the status quo, and it is I think move towards the proper direction, right direction, which is like we're not only thinking only in numbers and utilitarian theory, but we are looking at human behavior and interaction. So that is, they try to address this issue as and we are trying also to address this issue of how can we challenge the status quo. So it does, I mean, so what I'm trying to say here is that these are major challenges in bringing a new knowledge. And I hope that we just appreciate what is the mechanism on the ground right now that exists, and not just like, I know that the existing mechanism has a lot of shortcomings, and that's why we are here. But then what becomes our challenge is that how can we do better than what exists right now. Allahu alam.
Dr. Basma, would you like to comment?
No, I'm good. I'm just learning this morning.
You're good. Okay.
I'm putting my comments in the
talking
chat.
about policy and economic. You wrote about these things. That's why I will speak.
Well, I know, but I don't want to take the time. I mean, I have concerns about a lot of, the perspectives. I don't believe that tenure protects anybody in the West. I'll just put that, out there. Tenure comes very late in a professor's career, and it's a time when they know that you are tired and you're comfortable, and there's only so much you're willing to do to rock the boat and change the status quo. And so the system, I think, is designed in such a way that prevents revolutionary or radical change. It is not just my opinion. I've spent the past year probably reading some of the big historical works, and they pretty much say the same thing. Especially in the post-war period, a lot of the historians that were writing basically said we could not expand on our disciplines without the prospect of being thrown in prison. And it's only when we lost our oomph and our revolutionary fervor, that they were allowed back in the halls of mainstream academia. So there is a concern there. I think if we go back to the Quran, the only comment I'd make, which is one I made in the chat, is that I don't believe that Islam is anthropocentric. I don't believe that it revolves around humanity alone. And I think the Quran makes that clear. And it's a way to humble us. And it's a way for us, when we think about all of these issues as Muslims, and in this process of tajdeed, and in this process of islah, that we think beyond our humanity, and we think towards all of what Allah created, subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I think there's a beautiful technique in the Quran where there are hints towards what is greater than us, but there's nothing direct. And these are the things that I'm hoping this methodology will bring to the discussion table, that we could step away from that very selfish, greedy existence that we've had to date in almost all of the disciplines. And I don't think it's just a Western thing. I think it's a global phenomenon. And I think it's very much part of our history as well, and our heritage, and a part of fiqh, that we became so human centered. So really, these are my major comments.
I agree with you absolutely on the tenure thing. I was going to say the same thing, because the academic system, and I taught in a dozen universities, does not allow the promotion of new ideas. And that is why we have a think tank here in the Maqasid Institute, in order to promote new ideas freely without the hegemony of the academic institutes. I can speak about science, I can speak about Islam, of course, from here until tomorrow, but about science, science has some basic ideas that are inaccurate, that anybody who tries to challenge them is going to be considered a pseudoscientist or mystic or something. Or my specialization on the systems had to do with neuroscience at that time, and cognitive sciences. And in neuroscience, and refer to the Journal of Consciousness and Neuroscience, they don't believe in consciousness. Consciousness for them is chemicals in the brain. And as a PhD student, and eventually as a professor, if I had proposed that consciousness is beyond the neural interactions of the brain, and that we are actually, as beings, we are much more complex than that, and we have this jasad, but we have nafs and we have ruh, and that is, to me, science. But people consider this to be pseudoscience because they went to the philosophy of science and closed the door of ijtihad in the philosophy of science.
they considered evidence to be something that you do in the lab. And yes, there is a lot of correctness in this, a lot of good that could come out of this in certain fields, but human experience is not just the lab. And there is something fundamentally wrong about the lab when you put those probes and you draw the brain and how it works. And therefore you conclude that the trees are not conscious and the animals are not conscious. Most cognitive scientists do not believe that animals are conscious to start with. Doctora is talking about the animals, some of them are even better than us. وَفَضَّلْنَاهُمْ عَلَى كَثِيرٍ مِّمَّنْ خَلَقْنَا. Not everything that we خلقنا, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had preferred us over a lot of what He created, but some of what He created is better than us and is more aware than us. Watching the ducks the other day migrating, and I was wondering, they migrate using the stars, and they go back south to the same lake and sit under the same tree every year, generation after generation. This is very complicated, and this is very aware of the reality. But people in marine science or people in biology and so forth, so far, they freak out when they realize that the genes are making choices on the genetic level, or that it seems that the subatom is conscious. Reed Bohm, I put him this morning as one of the references. I wrote a sentence about it in the book. Reed Bohm, he's a mainstream scholar. He helped them do the atomic bomb at some point. He's not a maverick from Tibet, but he is talking that they concluded in the physical labs that they have to buy into the idea of the consciousness of matter in order for physics to develop. That is not solving a problem that you have with your car. I'm not talking about this level. I'm talking about the level of the basic ideas of science, where major scientists in academia, of course, who could not continue in academia, read Bohm's story and where he went and so on. He hardly had a post in Germany and then eventually in England, but very, very difficult to continue in academia if you have a new idea. The scientist in France who told the world that you don't need oil, you actually could run cars on water, and eventually he was killed. Look for the story. Why? Because he departed from the idea of that kind of engineering into a design that is different, that is going to use what? Water, or somebody, I don't want to get into Tesla and into a number of people who try to change the paradigm. And if you read their papers, they're scientists. They are hardcore scientists, but they were dubbed. I considered Tesla to be some maverick, some weird guy, until I actually went and digged out and started to read his papers. And the guy is a scientist, and he had some brilliant ideas for medicine and for physics, for that matter, and therefore how do we do better? Yes, at one level, we want to improve the public discourse. At a deeper level, we want to improve the approach of academics in mainstream universities and ethics and so forth. And in one level, we want to make Islamic approach comprehensive and holistic and so on. But on a deeper level, we would like to bring a new worldview that tries to change some of the basic premises of sciences that are problematic, and evidence is against, evidence is against causality as the deeper, if you wish, logic in science. Evidence is against that, because if I believe everything is causal, at the frontiers of physics and neuroscience and archaeology, for that matter, at the frontiers of these things, the logic doesn't work anymore. The tunnels that they're discovering under Europe, this is not made by apes. This is intelligent. And this is 100,000 years ago. Humans were not around at that time. Or what is that? The archaeologists say, oh, this conspiracy theory, and these are, no, but these are like thousands of miles of tunnels under Europe. But archaeologists don't want to get into that. And the archaeologist, a professor, who gets into that loses his job, right? Whoever questions the age of the pyramids, if you read about that, I forgot the name of the guy, during the time of Hosni Mubarak, and his minister of archaeology actually contacted the university in America, and they fired him. I can tell you the story if you wish. It's very interesting that the Egyptian politics is firing professors in America when they dare question the time of the pyramids and the making of the Sphinx, right? Why? Because if you take the Sphinx 10,000 years back, we were apes. We were not supposed to be making something like the pyramids of the Sphinx, right? And it's not going to be an Egyptian tourism thing anymore, right? So I'm just throwing a few ideas. I hope that this would, steer some ideas in that training. Any other comment? I'm trying to read. Please, just open the mic and speak, please. We use our time.
So one thing I hope we do here is that we really push back. It is very, very important. I mean, this is part of what I try to do. I've, as far as I've heard Sheikh Jasser make these statements or this in many, many, many lectures, and I'm often surprised that very few people challenge what is being said. I remember one distinctly, he's speaking to a group of economists, and they all just listened and just did not even comment, did not either support or negate some major challenges that Sheikh Jasser is making against in the field of economics, which leaves me kind of dumbfounded. Do you agree or do you not agree? Most of the time, we just listen and nothing happens. We're really not thinking, really, even in these big gatherings. So here again, I want this group specifically to speak up. You all have been trained. You all have some Western training, more or less. I need that to come across, because if you're not challenging what Sheikh Jasser is saying, then we'll be in big trouble. Then you are really not the change that we are hoping for. So here, when Sheikh Jasser says that, well, they're not thinking about human well-being, well, this is not acceptable to me. They're all thinking about well-being. It's just that they are defining well-being differently, and they come from a historical experience that tells them why this is the best way to define well-being. And especially the West is very, very scared from theologians coming with what is well-being, because that led to disasters throughout human history. Also, this happened at the Muslim world. Muslim theologians and scholars created disasters throughout Muslim history because of their opinions, and that happened during early time of our Islamic history, all the way until today. There is some disastrous opinion that are being presented. So how can we trust somebody who is claiming that he speaks on behalf of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and trust that he really knows what my well-being here? An example here, like when Sheikh Jasser start talking about anthropology and development of languages, that is very alarming for me. You are challenging the status quo, and before you challenge the status quo, you better have some solid evidence, supported by some expertise. Now, if you tell me, well, the expertise in the general field, mainstream, is not adequate, well, then how do we verify anything? I mean, this is why we have a crisis in trusting authority and specialization in the West. This is why we have Trump in America, because we do not know which authority to trust. This is why people are having big problem trusting in the COVID-19 vaccine. Again, it is because we don't trust any authority. And so this is very challenging. It's very challenging for me when I was learning economics and history of economics and human development, is that, well, our story seems to start from the two sons of Adam. Maybe it is we can critique the story that, did they really start with husbandry right away and agriculture or farming, when there's a whole big history that we started from hunting and gathering before that until we get to a point in human history where we have this. So how do you reconcile this with that? Maybe it is minor issue, maybe it is major issue, but it is kind of back again to this issue of how did languages develop. Adam was able to speak and communicate, obviously. So, but then there was all this history that happened before, where there's something before, but the major issue here becomes, you know, a conflict between aql and naql. That is becomes an issue when we say there's no conflict between them. So I just want, the key thing here is that we have to challenge what is being presented in this conversation. We are, I mean, always we're just Muslims talking to each other. This small group of people who are probably, we are under the mosque definition, and we just have an internal conversation. And our conversation is not going to become really intelligent until we reach out and challenge what's being said, and be able to face the world with rigorously debated and vetted ideas. Wallahu alam.
Jazakallah khair. Jazakallah khair. No, I appreciate that, Dr. Zaid. And inshallah, Brother Muhammad, I just have to quick comment. I appreciate that you're asking my brothers and sisters to challenge the ideas, because that is what the seminar is about. I'm not, as I said, just teaching the book. The book is there, you can read it, inshallah, no problem. But please challenge the ideas. You challenged one statement I made about language. And yes, as a person who deals with the Quran, I am very much, I don't want to say updated, but I read a lot in the Arabic language research, because that is close to what we study in the Quran. The research in the Arabic language does not necessarily come from the same perspectives of linguists in the West. And it does try, those who have an Islamic background, they try to merge between the Quranic facts. As you mentioned, that Adam obviously was not speaking a Proto language. Allah taught him names, right? And they were speaking, and we have that. So what I'm saying is, Akhi, that the Arabists and people who are specialized in the Arab linguistics, when they speak about Arabic being very close to the origin of humanity as a language, of course, linguists in the West are saying that Arabic is even after Hebrew, not even parallel to Hebrew, because they have an agenda, they have a philosophy, they have a worldview. Coming from the Islamic worldview, there are a few scholars. Who are they in Oxford or Cambridge? Of course not. They wouldn't make it to Oxford or Cambridge, because they say that Arabic is a very ancient language. And I am aware, I lived in Egypt beginning of my life, and my father happened to be in the Ministry of Culture there. I have met a couple of Egyptologists who do not believe that the pyramids is a pharaonic device. And this is not conspiracy or pseudoscience. These are scientists from Cairo University and so forth. But they don't get promoted and they don't become ministers. Why? Because they have a different approach to Egyptology and a different premise. So what I'm saying is that, of course, what I have to say have to be evidenced. And perhaps I could dig some of these things and send you some, if you are interested in the Egyptology thing or in the Arabic language thing. Hunting and gathering, yes, there is evidence for it, but it doesn't have to be the only scenario of humanity. I believe that humanity, as I mentioned in the book, developed, and by the way, I'm keeping the book to the basic facts so that I'm not into controversies in a particular discipline in a book of methodology. And I'm very happy with any comment that takes me away from that battle, to battle people in the field of economics or medicine. And I'm not claiming that. But in the book, I'm saying that humanity could have developed in parallel ways. Yes, we discovered hunting and gathering 10,000 years ago, but we discovered things in Turkey 20,000 years ago, right? That is not hunting and gathering, that's intelligent. So what I'm saying is that sometimes in academia and mainstream academia, they focus on one stream of the linguistic studies or the archaeological studies or the fiqh studies for that matter. And they ignore that there are other streams and other voices in fiqh, in archaeology, in industry, in medicine, in economics, other streams that could be very informative and could be different because they come from a different premise. That I would like to make this like to help. You know, I would like to help, but not necessarily to give my opinions. And Jazakallah khair, Dr. Zaid, I really appreciate your input here. Brother Muhammad has his hand up, and then Brother Mu'taz. Oh, sorry, you're leading it, Brother Mu'taz. I've been so Brother Muhammad and then Brother Mu'taz, inshallah.
Yeah, assalamu alaikum.
First time to participate, أخي. تفضل سي محمد. تفضل.
Barakallahu feek. Thank you so much. I'm just after reading and listening, I discovered the gap that I overlook by reading the book. So I think those kind of sessions will help to dig deep into to debate, because the debate of the ideas is the bottom line, where we can start challenging the change, or start challenging at least the actionable plan for that. I want to go back to the last section before this one, the one that you were criticizing the methodology component, where you were talking about taqlid and tafkik and other ones. So I was thinking, Wallahu alam, that those challenges need to be well studied as foundation for this methodology to succeed. And that's, you are giving some light on different areas, and some of them kind of universal challenges. Those kind of, we agree about with other people from different kind of goal in the issue of taqlid. We agree about decomposition. It's getting kind of criticized in many platforms, not only in ours, and so on. So we need to relate kind of or to build the base of promoting this type of research around those areas, because those are kind of introduce why we are coming up with different challenges, why we are coming up with different kind of proposal kind of thing. And there is a lack, at least in the area of Islamic studies, there is a lack of the depth in challenging those universal challenges in terms of methodology. This is kind of an obstacle for us advancing the methodology to the scholar level, or at least to the level of where we are challenging the way we are reading our religion kind of thing. Because we still in this fog, in this doubt, we are using, and we are belonging to some schools without be aware about what we are doing apologetically, or coming up with some level of tabrir or justification without being aware about that. And this is kind of lack of depth, and we need just to dig deep in promoting more research in those areas, because they are very strong, at least foundation as an introduction. And I would like to add in that section some challenges related to our specific reading of Islam. You highlighted the universal challenges of those methodologies, which we can be agree with anybody else, but there are some other challenges related to us as Muslim history. And I would like to have it not only universal challenges in terms of methodology, but also what is specific in the Islamic schools when they start reading or when we start investigating the religion in the way we elaborate in our history and so on. And I'm referring here specifically of the fiqh school, the fiqh reading of the Islam. So that's, it could be belonging to the jazi that you mentioned there, but it needs to be elaborated by its own, because it gives all the complexity of why we are doing the fiqh reading of the Islam. and how it is related to taqlid and how it is related to tabrir, and maybe how it is related to different methodology embedded in the way we received what is the revelation and what is the sacred, and we cannot touch it, we cannot think about it unless if somebody else told us, and so on. And there is some other obstacles here that I would like to have them elaborated in the way we are reading specifically from our, and this is kind of concern, this is kind of question and concern. I would like it to be more elaborated there. I would like just to add one items here in terms of that section that about the challenges. There are also challenges about the Muslim people. If they are challenging those issues and they don't have solid framework, what happened? They will refer to what they have. As a human being, this is kind of a human obstacle. It's psychological of the stability, psychological of not dealing with the doubt, psychological of not dealing with the uncertain. I need to deal with something certain, even if it is wrong, doesn't matter. And because of this dilemma, it's not because of the authority all the time. It's also because of our human nature and condition, that if I find maqasid build on those 5 components and I don't have alternative, what I will do, I know that they have concerns. I know that they may not fulfill all that stuff, but because of the human condition, I will not rely on risking and jump into something not certain, and so on. For that, I would like a section just to criticize, because of the specificity of this 5 dimension of the maqasid. I want it to be called out. Now it's not called out. We are referring to it in behind scenes, and it need to be called out and well criticized and well decomposed somehow. I don't want to use the word decomposing here, but well kind of deconstruct in order to tell, not for the sake of deconstructing it, but for the sake of reconstructing some alternatives that can go beyond this challenge of those 5 conditions there. That's kind of thing as I have, and thank you so much. Appreciate it.
But that is a big topic, Sheikh. It requires perhaps the next book. I mean, to call out everybody. But Jazakallah khair. I agree. Dr. Mu'taz, Akhi Mu'taz.
Jazakallah khair. I have 2 questions and 1 comment. The first question is related to chapter 2, when we talk about the limitation of these taqlid and tajzi and tabrir, and in some main tools in the usul al-fiqh as ijma', how we could deal in this new maqasid methodology with ijma'. Could this methodology consider ijma' as one of a valuable and respectful tool, or could consider ijma' as a taqlid that we should go far away from it? And regarding to chapter 3, and we talk about the sources of knowledge, could we consider the classic logic or Aristotelian logic that the Islamic kalam actually based on it? Could we consider it as a really respectful source of knowledge, or we could consider that the contemporary logic and the analytic philosophy that just we will consider this kind of logics as a invalid logic? This is the second question. My comment is related to Dr. Zaid's comment, actually, and I agree with him 100%, and really thank him. I would like to thank him about this kind of, that he tried to motivate us to ask or to challenge or put this, try to criticize the methodology here. But I thought that the case here, Dr. Zaid, that Dr. Jasser, or the methodology, yet it the methodology itself didn't make this with the tradition sources, because even Dr. Jasiriyat, he didn't criticize the heritage. So this is reflect on our behavior with his new methodology. And I thought if he answered me about these two questions clearly, we will deal after that, even acceptance or disagree with what he will deal with it.
Thank you. Well, barakallah fikum jamia. Okay, I'll answer the questions and hopefully this will inshallah make the situation better. About ijma', I added something in the last file that you have. It's a couple paragraphs in the last chapter on the relationship between maqasid methodology and usul al-fiqh. And I gave two examples from the ijma' and from the qiyas. What I mentioned in summary is that the usul al-fiqh are a special case of the maqasid methodology. Because number one, they deal with juridical issues, and the maqasid methodology deals with a wider circle than the juridical circle, the area of يعني الأخلاق والقوانين وكذا والفقه بالمفهوم التقليدي يعني. So number one, the maqasid methodology is a wider circle, and the usul al-fiqh is dealing only with the jurisprudence and not with the other sciences and phenomena. The second difference is that the usul al-fiqh, there is a difference between the primary sources and the secondary sources. The primary sources, the maqasid methodology, of course, agrees, the Quran and Sunnah. The secondary sources, starting from al-ijma' and al-qiyas and so on, I mentioned in the book that they are tools rather than sources. أدوات وليست مصادر. In the sense that al-ijma' is a tool for collective ijtihad, and that we do not have evidence about the ijma'. I wrote this in the book. If you go to the last chapter, we do not have evidence from the nusus shar'iyya that we have on ijma', except for لا تجتمع أمتي على ضلال. That is where ijma' is mentioned and is clear. But وَاتَّبِعْ غَيْرَ سَبِيلِ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ and the others are not really hujaj in making the ijma' qat'i. Yet I consider them to be an ijtihad that could be part of the proofs, not all the proofs, but part of it. And I called for the renewal of ijma' into a method of collective ijtihad. ijtihad جماعي يعني تطوير الإجماع لكي يصبح أداة للاجتهاد الجماعي في الواقع المعاصر. So I mentioned this about ijma'. About the classical logic, similarly, the classical logic or Aristotelian the syllogistics are a special case of logic. And under the chapter, the section on proofs, you will see that the proofs, some of it are simple causes and the binary divisions that in categories, Aristotle, when he divided everything in this binary. So the binary logic and the causal logic and all of that, I'm not against it, obviously, but it's a special case of the bigger picture of the Quranic proofs. The Quranic proofs are much more multidimensional, and they do not divide categories into black and white. Even Ahl al-Kitab, there are darajat, and kufr, there are different levels, and iman, different levels, and everything is different levels. So I am saying that the Quranic logic is multidimensional, and I think I am influenced by the systems philosophy that I studied in this, but I am not claiming that this is an Islamic systems philosophy. I think every scholar would be influenced by the logic of the time. That is why Imam Shafi'i was influenced by the logic of the Arabs of the time and a little bit of the Greek philosophy, I claim, in some other book. And then eventually, by the time of Imam Ghazali, he is a Greek philosopher by all counts, even though he wrote against Tahafut. So every scholar, logic is funny because the Quran, I mentioned in the section on proof, can carry any kind of human logic that the reason accepts. And therefore, there is a difference between the aqli that the Quran has evidence for, like Imam Ghazali went and studied the exclusivity and the different forms of the syllogistics from the Quran. And he proved that this is al-adal aqliya, the rational tool. Similarly, I'm going to the Quran and I am proving from the Quran
the logic of webs and the logic of emergence, which is in the Western scholarship, the Journal of Emergence started in the 90s. Go and look for it. But the logic of التولد, تولد المعاني, is old in Islam. So I'm going back to تولد المعاني. I'm actually building on تولد المعاني in Islam from the Quran in order to do that. So I hope that this answers that both أصول الفقه التقليدي and the تقليدي منطق are actually a special case of what we are talking about, because we aim at renewing. And that is the paradigm of renewal anyway. When Einstein took the physics to the frontiers he took, he did not negate Newton, the 3 laws of Newton. He actually employed them. But he realized that there is something on the frontier of science that is not Newtonian. And that is how he proposed the paradigm of relativity. That is a different worldview. When you see that space and time are connected, and when you go, equals E equals mc squared, this is a different paradigm, but does not negate Newton altogether. But Einstein himself, at some point, stopped in front of the subatomic change of energy and all that, and prediction of the future, like weird stuff. And he said that this is weird. He called it weird, right? And then when they told him, well, this is probabilistic as a tool of explaining it, he said that God doesn't play dice, right? But then the quantum physics people did not negate the Einsteinian worldview. They actually built on it. Like the EC, and that's basically, if you wish for an example from the paradigms of science, that's what we're trying to do here. We're not negating usul al-fiqh or usul al-i'tiqad or the sciences of hadith or the sciences of tafsir, but we are saying that they are a special case of what we are trying to do in order for us to open a room for dealing with the frontiers of Islamic studies, which is the new phenomena that we don't have answers for. And not just that, but even the new phenomena in science that we don't have answers for, that scientists are fighting over. I'm not claiming to be a scientist who is going to solve the problems of physics and so on, but I'm just wanting to open a space for Islamic studies to contribute to that, because there are new spaces, multidisciplinarity, some tenured professors, as Dr. Zaid and Dr. Basma mentioned, sometimes they go out of the line and they offer some new ideas and so forth. But we need to create a space for Islamic studies to offer new ideas. And this is what we're trying to do with the methodology. So I see Dr. Badi. Oh man, we are approaching the end of this. This is, to me, it's a very useful class. I'm not sure whether you see the same or not. Any other comments? Not. Yeah, please go ahead. Back to you, Dr. Martez. Go ahead, please.
I'm just have a comment that I'm trying I will try in the next session just to change my examples and thought, because I thought, as Dr. Zaid, as Dr. Basma sometimes mentioned, that we always stuck in the history. So I will try in the next time from my side to bring like sustainable development goals as a case study and try to apply the methodology directly without making the history as a bridge. Because I thought each time we go in the history, we will stuck there because we will stuck for 2 reasons. The first reason, because the issues is too complicated actually, and the second reason, because it's too sensitive to say, okay, disagree 100% with ijma'. I don't think Dr. Jasser will answer me these kind of very clear answers that I'm looking to it. So I will try to understand the methodology using the future, not using the past. So just I will try my best in the next time to bring from the sustainable development goals, from feminism or something like this, abortion, and all these examples maybe will help us just to avoid the
Absolutely. I remind me of our Ustad and Sheikh Al-Qaradawi, Allah يمسيه بالخير ويديله الصحة, when he said, I don't disagree with الإجماع, but there is no إجماع on the definition of إجماع. So he didn't say يعني أنا أرفض الإجماع, لكن قال لهم يعني طيب عرفوا لي الإجماع وأنا أوافق معاكم يعني, لكن ليس هناك إجماع على تعريف الإجماع. يعني this is the safest that you can say. Any other? Oh, mashallah, I see a lot of in the chat comment and everything.
Yes,
but
I have.
Please go ahead, Doctor.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Doctor.
Okay. When we talk about assessing the lived reality, and you see sometimes in our Muslim or Islamic discourse about the West, about the science or the lived reality in the West, and this has some bearing on our understanding of those societies, is that many a time we look at it as a homogeneous society. That whatever we can have some of our ideas that are happening in the United States, that maybe it is the same, like let's say in the Scandinavian countries, or in other European countries like in Netherlands or Russia or Germany. But these societies are quite heterogeneous. I mean, they're quite different. And sometimes this lived reality, you know, some of these countries like Scandinavian countries, they are considered to be the happiest, or where the well-being is the best in the world today. And there is a lot we can learn. And methodologically speaking, when we take some also positive, positive sides or positive experiences of those countries, and you know, just try to maybe not match, try to see a common ground with them, because people do live there and quite happy, and the well-being in many of these countries is quite good. And you know, we cannot just look at something quite in a negative way in those societies. So how do we bear this on our methodology of dealing with, for us as Muslims in those societies, and also maybe dealing with as public policy or whatever?
They're quite happy, but they have the highest level of suicide. So that is interesting.
And we have to distinguish between material happiness and happiness. Sorry to interrupt, you know, there's the different kinds of happiness. You know, like for a Muslim, I could speak for myself, happiness has to do with the spirit and has to do with my heart. You can give me all the wealth of the world and you can make it a great system and you can make it pretty. But for me, happiness is something very different. So I think it goes back to some of the discussions we were having in the chat. We have to define our terms. So they may be happy in a certain way. And I don't know, maybe some of them are spiritually happy. We would have to study that. But for the Muslim Ummah, I think when our definition has to have that element, because I cannot see a Muslim being happy without that connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, no matter how much worldly comfort you give them. Many of us would give that up to have the relationship with Allah and to have, you know, mosques and to have our institutions and to have our community. And so we have to really be nuanced when we think that they're happy. To me, they're not happy. They can tell me they're happy, but in my world, they're not happy. Yeah. So
we have a member here who was close to this area, Dr. Yahya. So perhaps
are you happy?
Whether the society in Switzerland is happy, you know?
No, I don't think so. I think it's propaganda, as I wrote, because I read such articles, but it doesn't make sense. I think that's
compared to what, though?
Highest rate of suicide, many drugs. I live in other countries. I live in Algeria, for instance. In Algeria, people hate the system and there are a lot of problems, but I think they are happier than here if we compare. So we cannot compare, but this idea of happiness in the northern European countries, it's very strange for me. That's not what I see, but that's just based on economic, materialistic visions, I think, and also the people who reply to such surveys, maybe there are some bias, because of course there are people who live very well here, but I never understood that this kind of idea. I read that article though, but I don't get the sense.
Well, actually, there's the World Happiness Report, and you know, they basically have a number of indicators that they use to assess countries in terms of happiness and the fulfillment of happiness, which is obviously quite interesting thing to read. Sorry.
Allahu Akbar.
Inshallah, 2 adhans in one session.
Two adhan, yeah. This is no Maghrib actually. So, sorry. It seems that whenever I start to speak, then
Allah yakrim. I want to wrap
perfect timing.
Muhammad quickly, inshallah, and then wrap up because I really don't want to keep you more than the 3 hours.
Barakallah feek.
Barakallah feekum. Akhi Muhammad, please go ahead. Final comment. Oh, this Sister Marwa. Sorry, I read Muhammad. It's Sister Marwa. Please go ahead.
Yes, assalamu alaikum. So it's like a general question actually was coming to my mind from the beginning, and I just wanted to postpone it to the future. But then I said to myself, we can just through it right now. And I know Dr. Jess says that too. We can discuss it not now. I know it's like it would need a long answer. And excuse me if you think it's a rude question or something like that, but really it came to my mind just from the first time I started to read the book. So we have like a big high goal of achieving a renewal in the maqasid field, inshallah. And on the other hand, we have, it could be I have like a special fear. It could be lack of experience, lack of knowledge, I don't know, but I have that fear of really going to a wrong direction of renewal, which maybe not us would use it wrongly, but maybe others would use the theory and the methodology in a wrong way to do what the hadith is saying about what man ahdatha fi amrina hadha, or any of these directions which would corrupt something in the core of the religion. So I know that you have done something like that in the methodology. What are the guarantees, the built-in guarantees in the methodology that would let us achieve the high objective of renewal in the field, and at the same time protect us from ourselves and protect others from themselves from really going to a wrong direction of renewal? And that is the question.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Jay.
Wallah, jazakumullah khair. This is a very important question, the answer of which will be part of next lecture's discussion for sure, because next lecture is about chapter 4 and 5. It's about the methodology and the framework. And yes, they might look pretty, but we have to make sure that people don't use them for the wrong ends. What are the thawabit and the mutaghayyirat, the fixed matters and the variable matters? What do we mean by tajdeed? Your question is a very important question. You shouldn't have postponed it, but inshallah, the answer is going to be for next time, inshallah. This would be one of the themes of next time discussion. So I would like to finish, inshallah, so we don't keep you more, even though I know that we can stay and I can see a lot of interesting chat. And jazakumullah khair. I hope that this has been useful. Inshallah, hopefully next time, please read chapter 4 and 5 and be prepared with any questions or anything. And I will speak less, inshallah, next time, so we have the discussion, because when Dr. Zaid pushed us to discuss, now the points are coming out. Now the real questions are coming out. Jazakumullah khair. Barakallahu feekum. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to help us. اللهم اغفر لنا ذنوبنا وإسرافنا في أمرنا. اللهم كن لنا ولا تكن علينا، وانصرنا ولا تنصر علينا، وآثرنا ولا تؤثر علينا، وامكر لنا ولا تمكر علينا، وخذل عنا ولا تخذلنا. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. ربنا يسر هذه الأمة أمر رشد وخير، يعز فيه أهل طاعتك ويذل فيه أهل معصيتك، ويؤمر فيه بالمعروف وينهى فيه عن المنكر. صلى الله على محمد النبي الأمي وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. جزاكم الله خير. بارك الله فيكم. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We'll be in touch, inshallah. Jazakumullah khair, inshallah.
Assalamu alaikum.
Jazakumullah khair, all of you. Jazakumullah khair.